Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, chers partenaires de Intermountain Health, a warm welcome to you in Geneva. C'est un grand honneur et un privilège de vous accueillir aujourd'hui au Centre de l'innovation pour ce symposium en leadership. Nous avons choisi le Centre de l'innovation pour ce symposium pour la simple raison que nous sommes convaincus que c'est à la croisée de deux forces, le leadership et l'innovation, que se forge l'avenir de notre institution. Et quand on parle de leadership, c'est pas le leadership de statut, c'est pas le leadership de pouvoir, c'est pas le leadership qui écrase ou qui impose, c'est vraiment le leadership qui se cultive, qui se construit, qui se partage et qui se développe ensemble. Vous savez, dans le monde hospitalier, I hope your French is okay or the translation service is good. Thank you. Dans le monde hospitalier, comme dans beaucoup d'autres environnements, il y a beaucoup de clichés, il y a beaucoup de biais. Et puis je pense, qui n'a pas eu ce cliché de le leadership dans un milieu hospitalier, c'est vraiment le technicien brillant, souvent le chirurgien talentueux, qui fait des miracles, qui fait de la magie, qui sauve des vies. Et je pense que le leadership, c'est pas seulement être un bon technicien, ne donne pas automatiquement la licence pour être un grand leader. C'est pas mutuellement exclusif et c'est tout à fait possible de voir les deux réunis. J'ai récemment eu l'expérience de passer une demi-journée dans un bloc opératoire et j'ai vu quelque chose d'assez profond. J'ai vu d'abord une équipe, j'ai vu une équipe soudée par la confiance, j'ai vu une infirmière qui avait le bon geste au bon moment, j'ai vu une aide-soignante qui anticipait, j'ai vu un anesthésiste qui était à l'écoute, attentif aux moindres détails, et j'ai vu un chirurgien qui donnait l'impulsion comme un chef d'orchestre et qui faisait son travail d'orfèvrerie, je dois dire. Et quand tous ces ingrédients sont réunis, la magie s'opère et une vie est sauvée. Et quelques heures plus tard, un patient qui, quelques heures plus tôt, était en sursis, on peut voir une photo de lui souriant parce que l'opération a réussi. Dans ce même milieu hospitalier, il y a aussi des choses moins enthousiasmantes qui se passent. Je pense que certains, ou certainement vous toutes et tous, êtes au courant des moments difficiles que nos équipes ont dû affronter au DRG et en particulier à l'hôpital des Trois-Chênes, où c'est un peu le contraire de cette magie qui s'opère et on sait très vite qu'on est très vite proie à un cercle vicieux qui nous traîne vers le bas. Il faut vraiment investir beaucoup d'énergie et de force pour accompagner, pour réparer, pour consoler, et pour porter les équipes pour surmonter ces phases difficiles. C'est plutôt notre ambition du premier leadership qu'on veut faire grandir et voir grandir au HUG. Mais pas seulement pour une certaine catégorie de collaboratrices et collaborateurs, mais on veut le voir grandir partout. On veut le voir grandir à travers les 11 sites hospitaliers des HUG, on veut le voir grandir à travers les 20 lieux de soins, les 160 métiers, les 13 000 collaborateurs et collaboratrices. Je pense que personne n'est une exception ici à cette règle qui est là. Et ce n'est pas pour faire joli, c'est parce que nous sommes vraiment convaincus et persuadés qu'un bon leadership, un leadership collectif, pas un leadership individuel, est la clé magique pour l'excellence des soins, qui est notre ambition en tant qu'hôpital universitaire à Genève et en Suisse. Et cela va nous permettre non seulement de transformer notre pratique des blocs opératoires, mais aussi au secrétariat. Pas seulement des équipes techniques, cliniques, médico-soignantes, mais aussi pour les équipes administratives, pour les équipes de soutien pour les équipes logistiques qui font fonctionner aussi l'hôpital. Le thème de ce leadership, c'est Healthcare Leadership. C'était quoi déjà? Idriss, Healthcare Leadership.
Changing healthcare.
Voilà. Changing Healthcare Leadership through character.
Character-based leadership.
Voilà. Changing Healthcare through character-based leadership. C'est le thème et je pense que nous avons une énorme chance d'avoir avec nous l'équipe de Intermountain Health qui va partager avec générosité toute leur expérience, leur savoir-faire, leur savoir-être et surtout échanger avec vous. Et je pense qu'il n'y a pas, c'est pas une science le leadership, c'est vraiment des échanges, des partages. Donc je vous invite vraiment à partager vos expériences, mais aussi vos doutes, vos vulnérabilités. C'est comme ça qu'on grandit et surtout à écouter et à être vraiment présent. Je pense que c'est une vraie opportunité pendant ces 3 jours de couper les téléphones, de se donner un moment pour connecter, pour avoir aussi des relations qui sont improbables dans la vie de tous les jours, parce qu'on est un grand hôpital, et d'échanger avec nos invités pour pouvoir après prendre ces apprentissages dans vos équipes et que ça ait une contamination positive. Ce thème s'inscrit parfaitement dans notre stratégie institutionnelle 2026-2030 et je considère que c'est la première fondation pour une initiative importante qui est la Leadership Academy, l'Académie de leadership que nous allons construire pour justement permettre à ce que cette pratique de leadership collectif puisse percoler à travers l'institution. And I will end with this. Leadership in healthcare is not a privilege of a few individuals. It is a shared responsibility because it is the very foundation of excellent patient care. So thank you very much. Enjoy the experience, and I will say a few moments before exiting to the executive team meeting today. Thank you very much. And, sorry. I would like here also to sincerely thank Professeur Idriss Guessous pour son intuition, sa persévérance, et je dois dire aussi son insistance bienveillante qui a permis à cet événement d'avoir lieu. J'aimerais aussi remercier toutes celles et ceux qui ont contribué à organiser cet événement. J'en vois certains, Claire, Myriam, elle est où, Maïsam et d'autres. Je n'ai pas tous les noms en tête, mais je sais que sans cette équipe, on ne serait pas réunis ici. Un grand merci à toutes et à tous pour cette organisation. Voilà, bonne journée.
Merci beaucoup, merci du fond du cœur. Et puis, alors c'est vrai qu'il y a eu de l'insistance, mais je dois dire que Robert a toujours laissé le fait que ça pouvait être possible. Donc avec des gens comme nous, c'est vrai que du coup on continue, mais je pense je sais que Robert a déjà compris, a compris tout de suite, mais jeudi soir, j'espère que vous aurez compris pourquoi j'insistais autant. Je vais vous rendre un grand service, c'est que je vais parler le moins possible, parce que pour vous, l'essentiel, c'est d'écouter les orateurs qui vont suivre. Je vais quand même vous présenter quelques slides qui vont résumer les 3 jours, l'ambition que nous avons, et puis vous raconter également pourquoi, en fait, comment l'histoire a commencé. Donc déjà, bienvenue. Du fond du cœur, Robert, le comité de direction, merci de ton soutien, de votre soutien, de la confiance. Vous aviez plein d'autres projets, plein d'autres initiatives, et puis vous avez trouvé le temps de soutenir celle-ci au propre et au figuré. Alors pourquoi ce symposium. En fait, bon, nous aimons tous les HUG. Nous voulons tous le succès des HUG. Et ce qui s'est passé, c'est que j'ai eu l'opportunité en 2023 d'aller faire une formation à Salt Lake City de leadership. Et en fait, ce qui s'est passé, c'est que j'ai observé, j'ai eu une expérience et bizarrement, je me suis senti l'obligation que vous puissiez la vivre. Alors, on ne va pas avoir une expérience... ne vous inquiétez pas, mais le niveau était tellement bon. Le niveau était tellement bon et vous aimant tellement et voulant tellement le succès des HUG, je dis c'est pas possible que je sois le seul à faire, oui, quelques heures, nombreuses heures de vol jusqu'à Salt Lake City et de revenir et d'essayer d'expliquer ce que j'avais vécu. Donc en fait, je crois que c'est juste cette insistance, c'était le témoin de l'envie que vous puissiez goûter à ce que j'avais vécu. Il était plus difficile d'insister auprès de Robert pour inviter 50 cadres à faire le déplacement jusqu'à Salt Lake City 2 fois une semaine. Donc je me suis dit, achievable goal, smart, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? Et en fait, on a cru avec Hilaria, Cominotti, qui est là. Voilà, comme toujours, c'est une travailleuse, c'est une faiseuse, mais j'ai dit, mais pourquoi est-ce qu'il est possible? Il faut que mes collègues des HUG puissent entendre ce que j'ai entendu, voir ce que j'ai vu. Et puis, on s'est donné le challenge de, je vais vous le dire, répliquer le plus possible ce que Intermountain, que vous connaissez, que vous avez lu comme système, a réussi à faire en tant qu'institut de leadership. Tout a été pensé, et je le dis, pour ressembler à ce que j'ai pu, ou ce que les participants des États-Unis notamment, vivent durant ces semaines à Salt Lake City. Et nous y sommes parvenus, et je me pince constamment, là vous le remarquez pas, mais pour me demander si c'est bien réel. Quand j'ai vu l'équipe d'Intermountain arriver à Genève, Hilaria, on repassait encore les nappes, je dis on parce que vous savez que c'est impersonnel, vous ne savez pas finalement si j'ai repassé moi-même les nappes ou pas. Mais quand je l'ai vu, c'était magique. Donc, j'espère vraiment que vous allez profiter autant que j'ai pu profiter précédemment. Il faut rappeler que quand vous arrivez à Salt Lake City, ils se sont donné les moyens de réussir. Il y a non seulement, et vous aurez la chance d'écouter Charles Sorenson dans quelques minutes, mais ils se sont donné les moyens, un peu comme les HUG et Genève, c'est qu'ils ont construit grâce à M. Kem Gardner, à partir de 2016-2017, sauf erreur, quand Charles Sorenson quitte la direction d'Intermountain et qu'il dit, en fait, après cette mission, il faut une mission de leadership qu'il entreprend. Ils arrivent à construire ce lieu qui est magique aussi, quand vous y arrivez. Et tout ceci, c'est un bâtiment qui est dédié au leadership, notamment médical, qui combine la clinique, et c'est un espace évidemment qui est magique pour ses cours, pour ses formations, et ça c'est grâce à la générosité du philanthrope Kim Gardner. Vous allez voir quelques slides, vous pouvez évidemment prendre toutes les photos que vous voulez, je vous parcours juste globalement les valeurs de Intermountain, et Charles vous dira ce qu'il pense du programme leadership et de la stratégie institutionnelle, à quel point il l'apprécie et il l'estime. Ben, vous voyez que c'est très proche de ce que les HUG se sont donnés comme ambition. Vous voyez bien l'écran, je ne sais pas s'il y a un moyen de diminuer un peu le soleil au centre d'innovation, si jamais si on peut améliorer encore le contraste, peut-être surtout pour les prochains orateurs. Vous voyez que c'est ce trusted leadership, l'intelligence émotionnelle évidemment. Il y a des notions qui vont vous surprendre, aussi dans l'éthique, bien sûr la responsabilité, une sorte de love, mais dans le sens, et vous le verrez durant 3 jours, pas trivial que l'on apprend, mais fondamental, et c'est aussi pour ça quand on va remettre un certain présent à nos orateurs, on a appelé ça love leadership, parce qu'au fond, c'est aussi ce qui simplement est une ambition, c'est de retrouver un peu cette âme, un peu cette envie de contribuer positivement aux gens. je me réjouis surtout que vous compreniez pourquoi Intermountain a intitulé son programme et a utilisé le terme de caractère. Ici, il est mal compris. On dit qu'il a un bon, mauvais caractère. C'est tout autre chose. C'est pas moi qui vais essayer de vous le transmettre, c'est nos orateurs. Ça n'a rien à voir avec la personnalité, qui est plutôt aussi ce qui caractérise une personne qui se regarde dans le miroir, mais le caractère, ce qui est au fond, le core value d'une personne. Et après 3 jours, vous allez vraiment, je pense, apprécier cette notion de caractère et qui est si importante dans les moments difficiles et qui caractérise définitivement les leaders. Mais je me réjouis que vous puissiez apprécier cette nuance. Alors, il y a un chemin qu'on vous a préparé. Je dirais quelques mots de remerciement, mais j'ai de la peine à croire que les personnes et les orateurs, les oratrices seront effectivement là au centre de l'innovation pour donner ces différents sujets. Ils ne répètent pas ce qu'ils ont lu ailleurs, c'est eux qui l'ont écrit. Donc vous n'avez pas les réplicas, vous n'avez pas l'écho, vous n'avez pas les rimes, vous avez les auteurs de ce dont on parle. Quand on parle du leadership qui multiplie, vous aurez l'autrice Liz Wiseman qui va venir, c'est elle la source de ces notions. Quand on lit Crucial Conversation, vous n'allez pas entendre quelqu'un qui a lu, qui en soirée vous cite un passage en particulier, vous allez avoir l'auteur de ce best-seller que plus de 5 millions de personnes ont déjà lu. C'était ça aussi l'ambition, c'est de faire venir ces orateurs, ces orateurs princeps, en fait, comme on aime aussi l'avoir en sciences. On sait que dans cette salle, il y a déjà les convaincus. On a voulu rendre ceci sur un mode volontaire, vous n'aviez aucune obligation de venir. On ne voulait surtout pas des gens qui allaient juger d'emblée en disant « Ah, mais pourquoi il a remis une cravate ? Ah, mais pourquoi Bref, pas être dans le jugement, apprécier. De nouveau, c'est un cadeau qui nous est fait et grâce à la connexion que nous avons avec Charles Sorenson. Ces orateurs ne seraient jamais venus sans l'appui de Intermountain, en tout cas très difficilement. Donc on sait que vous allez bien les accueillir, mais en fait, il n'y a pas de mal à renforcer le leadership des leaders existants. Et le pari, et ce que Robert a tout de suite compris, et quand je parle de Robert, c'est de Robert Marnini dans un premier temps et de Robert Tanner dans un deuxième temps, c'est que ça va ruisseler. Et en fait, il y a un programme au HUG extraordinaire qui va adresser tous les niveaux des cadres et des collègues des HUG. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est un peu comme la fête de Genève. Il y a la fête de Genève, même si à Genève, toute l'année, il y a la fête. Il y a un leadership, un programme toute l'année au HUG. Aujourd'hui, c'est un peu la fête du leadership. Il y aura d'autres occasions. Nous, on a eu la chance de contribuer à celle-ci. Et donc, on va fêter ce moment et ça va ruisseler. Vous êtes 50 à commencer. Vous vous souvenez du R de réplication, le R0. Positivons l'idée d'une transmission d'un côté contagieux. Vous savez qu'on s'inquiétait quand il était à 3, 2, 5, 10. Quand Pascal Sen, après 3 jours, aura été transformé, c'est certain que 50 de ses collaborateurs seront changés, que c'est certain que 500 personnes se seront influencées par ceci. Et donc, notre objectif, c'est que 13 500 collègues, à la fin, reçoivent une étincelle de ce que vous aurez goûté ici. Vous allez avoir Charles Sorenson, et vous réjouissez que je fasse la transition, je le sais. Charles Sorenson, je dirais quelques mots sur toi avant de passer à ta présentation sur les principes de leadership. Charles a fait un travail, une réflexion sur l'adéquation de sa pensée et le programme leadership des HUG qu'il a parcouru. Et il a été bluffé par la qualité de celui-ci et l'alignement avec sa vision et ses valeurs. Vous aurez ensuite Émilie Grégory cet après-midi qui est déjà venue ce matin repérer les lieux. J'espère qu'elle a retrouvé son hôtel. Je lui ai dit que si elle voyait Lausanne, c'est qu'elle avait marché trop longuement. Mais toujours est-il que venez, c'est Crucial Conversation et j'aurai l'occasion de dire quelques mots avant de la présenter. On aura Carter Dredge, qui est le nouveau directeur de l'Institut Leadership Intermountain, que je remercie évidemment du fond du cœur parce qu'il a été aussi instrumental pour que ça se fasse. Il sera rejoint par Stefan Scholz, que je remercie aussi d'être de là. On a déjà discuté hier soir, et rien qu'en 2 minutes de pitch, on avait l'impression de faire une journée de symposium en les écoutant sur comment les valeurs peuvent être en choc avec ce que la structure, ce que l'institution fait et comment ça peut créer des difficultés et comment changer les choses. Puis là, jeudi, vous aurez, comme les autres, mais des personnes extraordinaires. Lise Weisman, qui sera là pour vous parler de multipliers, cet effet où on n'est plus dans l'addition, mais dans la multiplication des effets positifs. Et puis, Intendra Wadwa, qui est aussi phénoménal. Vous pouvez le parcourir un peu sur les réseaux sociaux et qui parle de comment le inner mastery aura un impact sur l'extérieur et comment vraiment se connaître soi-même. Et c'est très lié au caractère versus la personnalité. Vous aurez donc un programme crescendo, leadership purpose, un leadership courageux, la notion de multiplier. Je vais terminer avant de dire quelques mots et quelques éléments plus opérationnels. Il y a une notion de confidentialité, vous allez avoir des interactions, des travaux, sentez évidemment vous libre. Nous allons filmer la session, sauf certaines interventions, mais nous allons couper en l'occurrence tous les moments où vous êtes en travaux de groupe. On veut quand même filmer pour garder évidemment un souvenir et puis pouvoir les partager à ceux qui ne peuvent pas être là toujours présents, mais sachez que durant les discussions, les travaux, ça ne sera pas filmé, donc sentez-vous libre. Frédéric Sandier m'a rappelé aussi une notion, sentez-vous libre de poster, partager sur les réseaux sociaux. Je vous invite à regarder avec vos yeux plutôt qu'à travers l'écran quand les gens parlent, et de filmer, de partager. Peut-être donc au lieu de filmer 45 minutes de Intendra vendredi et de le poster en ligne, ça par exemple on ne pourra pas le faire. Mais sentez-vous libre de prendre vos photos et de partager en ligne. De nouveau, du moment où ça reste parcimonieux dans le contenu que vous partagez. Ça m'amène à la fin, et puis vous avez vu que je n'ai pas pris plus que 2 minutes, d'exprimer mes remerciements. C'est plus que des remerciements, dans la vie, il y a quand même des choses qu'on arrive à réaliser et qui comptent plus ou moins. On a au HUG l'occasion de faire beaucoup de choses, mais ces 3 jours dans ma vie professionnelle sont vraiment un moment très très important dans mon parcours, parce que j'ai l'impression vraiment qu'on va faire quelque chose, on s'est donné à fond pour que pour vous, ça soit le meilleur moment aussi. Dans les remerciements, c'est Ilaria Cominotti, j'espère qu'elle est là maintenant, j'ai attendu, voilà, elle est juste là, donc on peut l'applaudir si vous êtes d'accord. Parce que Ilaria, en 2023, lorsque nous sommes sur la terrasse à Salt Lake City, que je dis, mais il faut qu'on fasse ça à Genève, il y a aussi cru, donc il y a un côté un peu crazy, on va dire, effectivement. Mais ensuite, il a fallu qu'on pitch ce projet à Charles Sorenson. Je vous assure, ça, par rapport à un examen de finale, c'est costaud. Et on a dû pitcher ce concept que Charles a suivi. Merci Laria, merci. C'est impressionnant ce que tu fais, ce que tu as réussi à faire. Il y a Myriam Laswed, Maïsam Némé, qu'on peut remercier 1000 fois. Myriam nous a rejoint, merci Maïssa, merci Myriam nous a rejoint, elle m'a rejoint comme project management, je crois quelques semaines. On avait déjà lancé l'idée de Intermountain. Elle a pris le projet, elle a grandi au HUG. Je vois pour Myriam un parcours incroyable dans sa générosité de ce qu'elle fait au niveau des HUG. J'ai rarement vu ce niveau de générosité. Claire Ebert-Strauss, je t'ai vu, merci du fond du cœur. Elle a suivi, elle avait mis l'autre truc à faire. Elle a certainement dû dire, Robert, écoute-le encore, même 2 minutes, même 30 secondes. Et elle a pris le relais à un moment donné où moi j'ai eu plus de difficultés à suivre tout dans l'opérationnel, et ça je l'oublierai jamais. Claire, Tristan, toute ton équipe, il y a quelqu'un de ton équipe hier qui repassait les nappes, et je l'ai pris en photo comme signe de leadership, et je les remercie évidemment. Elena et toute son équipe, merci du fond du cœur, et qui devra s'absenter pour aller défendre un projet au comité de direction. Bravo à elle et merci de le faire. Serena Baldelli, qui non seulement a organisé mais participe. Donc le prix à payer, on l'a dit, c'est qu'elle sera la première à devoir répondre aux questions. Serena représente toute la générosité de la direction de communication. Frédéric, j'ai l'impression de le faire constamment, mais merci du fond du cœur. C'est toujours très facile avec vous, grâce, je le sais, au soutien de Robert. Vous dire que ceci, et j'accélère, n'a été possible que grâce à un certain sponsoring. Cet événement est sponsorisé par la direction générale, Robert Mardini, par le service du leadership, par le centre de l'innovation, par le service de médecine de premier recours, et qui, quand je dis sponsoring, c'est réellement du sponsoring, et puis avec l'aide essentielle et généreuse de la Fondation privée des HUG, qui a complété ce qu'il fallait pour que ça se fasse, et puis on a la chance d'avoir une représentante que je viens de voir pourtant. Voilà, c'est marrant au moment. Et donc, du fond du cœur, merci à la Fondation privée, merci à ceux qui prennent évidemment les décisions. Il est tout à fait OK pendant un moment de vous lever et de vous servir, prendre un café. Même là, vous auriez pu le faire. C'est OK, c'est intense, il faut de l'énergie. Il y a exprès une machine juste d'heure. Donc, il est tout à fait OK de sortir, prendre votre café, servez-vous. Il y a d'autres choses, évidemment, on l'a installé juste ici. Le dernier point, Robert a insisté, et ça a été clairvoyant, pour que ça soit accessible à l'ensemble des cadres, y compris ceux qui sont moins à l'aise avec l'anglais. Et d'emblée, il a dit il faut des traducteurs. Et il a convaincu, même si on n'avait pas à challenger ceci, mais en fait, c'est devenu obvious. Et puis, ça a été rarement fait, mais nous avons 2 interprètes dans la capsule ici. Si vous pouvez jeter un petit coup d'œil, voilà, c'est vraiment magique aussi. 2 interprètes, nos collègues qui piaffent d'impatience en se disant « mais qu'est-ce qui est bavard ?» ont tout entendu en anglais, et puis vous avez tout entendu normalement en français. C'est juste, vous avez compris? Et c'est magique, et c'est vrai que tous nos collègues sont censés pouvoir donc comprendre, et donc doivent se sentir en capacité d'intervenir. On va bondir sur les orateurs pour les équiper, mais profitez de ce système pour ceux qui ne sont pas à l'aise de poser la question en anglais. On l'a fait pour vous, Robert l'a souhaité pour vous, on a investi pour vous. Donc profitez de ce système pour poser vos questions et pas vous retenir simplement par ce problème ou demander à votre collègue de poser la question parce qu'il en posera une autre. Et puis, j'arrive à la fin, jeudi, nous remettrons un certificat qui est évidemment qui n'a que très peu de points de CTS à la faculté de médecine, voire 0. Mais vous allez voir, ça fait plaisir de l'avoir quand même. On célèbre le fait que vous avez tenu 3 jours, y inclut l'introduction. Ça m'amène à l'introduction, Charles, eventually. And I will keep talking French because it's going to be too emotional, probably starting from now. C'est un privilège, c'est un moment fou de pouvoir inviter dans quelques secondes Charles Sorenson à venir nous rejoindre. Charles Sorenson, c'est tout pour beaucoup de gens, y compris pour moi. C'est surtout un chirurgien. Donc d'emblée, je montre à quel point le leadership, cette empathie, ces valeurs qui sont celles du leadership sont universelles de tous les métiers. Chirurgien formé tout d'abord dans cette éducation à l'université d'Utah, à Cornell, ensuite à New York, pour rejoindre de nouveau Intermountain dans les années 80, donc urologue de formation. Il devient vice-président de Intermountain, puis CEO d'Intermountain, et puis ceci pendant 11 ans. Et Charles, you just know if it's correct, if it's wrong, it's probably too late for me to correct. Et puis de 2009 à 2016, il devient le président et CEO de Intermountain Health. Il y fait des changements fondamentaux qui, encore aujourd'hui, se traduisent par des soins bienveillants, avec toutes les valeurs dont Charles va discuter encore aujourd'hui, même s'il n'en est plus le CEO. Et quand il quitte Intermountain, je vous ai parlé, il a cette envie de poursuivre comme mission et pour la communauté cette notion de leadership, et il construit, grâce à ce don, ce Transformation Center. Alors mon ami Charles, je dois rappeler que ton père a pratiqué, il me semble, la médecine interne. Is it correct?
Oui.
Si? Il était interniste et que ta mère était infirmière?
Oui.
Correct, oui. Donc rien n'aurait été possible sans Charles. Let me be clear. Je voulais la faire à la Obama une fois comme ça. Let me be clear. Rien n'aurait été possible sans Charles. C'est impossible d'avoir les orateurs, oratrices. On suit Charles, et quand Charles dit « nous irons à Genève », ben en fait, les grands leaders, les top leaders y vont, et on y va encore plus gaiement. Donc rien n'était possible sans toi, mais puisque tu m'as partagé certains projets que tu as dès janvier 2026, sache que on continuera à rendre possible tout ce que tu as fait. Par la suite, on est plein à vouloir continuer et à porter ton legacy. Charles, je t'invite à enfin rejoindre la scène et je te remercie encore du fond du cœur. Je vais te libérer du casque et on peut remercier et applaudir Charles Sorensen. Merci. Bon symposium.
Oui. Bonne matinée, mes amis. I call you my friends. I don't know most of you, but you are my friends because you are engaged in a noble cause, caring for people at their greatest times of need, and working according to principles that will deliver that care to them with genuine caring and love, and creating an environment where those who deliver that care can find joy and meaning in their work. Sadly, there are too few places in the world that have leadership principles like you have adopted. They're the things that we have been trying to teach at Intermountain for many years. And we've had our ups and downs along that journey. Sometimes things have gone better than others. Right now, I think it's on an upward journey once again, and I think we're trying to implement these principles that we'll talk about today. So just a brief, Idris was much too complimentary of me. My greatest ability is to spend time, to find friends, to hang around with people who are much better than I am. They're smarter, they're more principled, from whom I've had the privilege to learn for the last 60 years. And it's just been a privilege to work with people like that and to see people like Idris and all of you who are interested in making healthcare better for the people we serve and for the people who provide that care. So we come here not to show you how smart we are. We're learning. We come here to learn together with you. And very much our team wants to learn from what you're doing here. And so the conversations today, over the next few days, will be very important to us to learn. You have inspired us, and I've been very inspired as I've read the new leadership principles at HUG, which we'll talk about a little bit today. So I've had the privilege, the only thing I ever wanted to do in life was to be a physician, become a surgeon, and life is a strange thing. It takes you on paths you didn't ever anticipate. I loved working with my clinical colleagues, caring for patients in the operating room and in the clinics, working with our medical students and our residents. But I also felt, starting in about 1988, that healthcare in the United States needed to be different. It needed to be more focused on providing the best care, evidence-based best care, and we needed to have a different way of organizing. So one thing led to another, and I got involved in we started a medical group that was part of Intermountain in 1994 with employed doctors that worked for Intermountain, trying to align the incentives of the physicians with the incentives of delivering the best possible care at the lowest appropriate cost. And so I did that. I was the chairman of the board of that medical group for about 5 years, and then they asked me to take another administrative job, which I really wasn't that interested in doing. I loved being a doctor. But they kept asking, and I finally said, well, okay, I guess, if all I do is complain and I'm not willing to do something more than that, then shame on me. So I became the chief operating officer of Intermountain Healthcare in early 1998, and served in that job for 11 years, and then they asked me to be the president and CEO of Intermountain, which I did for 8 more years. And it was a great learning journey, but I decided I wanted to finish that work at the end of 2016. So I told the board of trustees of Intermountain in 2012 that I wanted to finish in 4 years. And they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I think we need a new kind of leadership in healthcare. And so I'd really like to, I've talked to some business schools in the United States about perhaps doing some teaching about leadership. And the chairman of our board said to me, he called me up a few days after that conversation. He said, I've been thinking if we started a leadership institute here at Intermountain where we could bring people in, bring faculty in from elsewhere, bring students from elsewhere, would you be willing to stay and work with that? I said, yeah, maybe so. And then, one thing led to another, and we started the Leadership Institute. Well, why did I think we needed a different kind of leadership? I grew up from the time I was in high school working around doctors and in healthcare. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do. And through college and through medical school and in residency, I was strongly enculturated in the best principles of medicine, which is medicine, you're there to be a servant of others, to help them through challenging times. And when I started, and for the first 20 years or so of my career, I saw the leaders of health systems and hospitals in the United States mostly behaving that way. I saw all the physicians with whom I worked for the first 20 years of my career more interested in their patients than in their own careers or money. But then something started to change around 2005. And I saw more and more health system leaders in the United States be more interested in the business, more interested in their own self-interests, their own promotion, their own wealth, and less really interested in the needs of others, either the patients or the caregivers at the front line, the nurses, the doctors, and others. And that was painful to see. We tried to do it differently at Intermountain, but I still saw that going on. I just thought that's what we needed to talk about. So that was really why we started our Leadership Institute. And we've been privileged now to have over 350 people come from 6 countries outside the United States and come from 26 of our 50 states, with a faculty who also come some from inside Intermountain and many from outside Intermountain, from whom you'll hear today. It's just been a great learning privilege for me. I've many times wished that I had learned 40 years ago what I've learned since we've been doing this Leadership Institute. It's been a great learning journey for me. And I personally believe that life really is about learning and trying to get better. And when you stop learning, you might as well go on to the next life, huh? So, start with a question for you. You should each have a small piece of paper that says in English at the top, how would you define leadership? Qu'est-ce que c'est leadership? 25 words. 25 mots. Oui. So take a minute and write it down, and then we'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then maybe a few of you would tell us what you think the definition of leadership is, okay? Okay. Who wants to share what they think leadership is? I will have my interpreter here in case you want to parler en français. Oui. Personne? Oui.
I would try my best in English. A
Ah.
guideline to promote the best of every team member to contribute to a commonly supported outcome.
Very good. Très bien. Un autre? Oui?
Again, I think leadership is the capacity, activity, and motivation also to influence, guide, and inspire others to do something.
Very good. To inspire, guide others to do something. Very good. Insightful. One or two more? Quelqu'un? Oui? Effectively coordinating the group to achieve a common goal. Over you. One more? Oui? Did you say consensual direction? Yes. So the group agrees.
Guy, j'ose juste vous dire que si vous utilisez le micro, ça va permettre aux interprètes de traduire. Chaque table a un micro, et là on a donc investi massivement. Donc utilisez s'il vous plaît les micros. Non seulement c'est filmé, on pourra entendre les questions, mais pour les interprètes c'est plus simple que d'essayer de vous entendre à travers la capsule. So Charles, I just asked our colleagues to use the mic.
Ah, oui.
Thank you for the translation.
So you want them to use the mic, but not me, right?
Indeed.
Oui. Well, let me tell you, those are great definitions. And so we'll talk about that. And we are here today because we are inspired by the work that you are doing. And as I said earlier, we are here today to learn from you. And it's obvious to me, just from hearing your answers, that we still have much to learn from you. But when we started the Leadership Institute, I thought that the biggest deficit we had in leadership in the United States, in healthcare, but in so many other areas, we have such difficult and challenging, complex work to transform healthcare, to deliver more consistently the best evidence-based care to our patients, and to do that at the lowest possible cost so it becomes affordable, which it's not affordable in the United States. And I will tell you, we recognize very acutely that in the United States, we are extremely good at providing some services. Like if you have advanced heart disease, if you are a severely sick newborn child, if you have complex cancers, or if you have a bad injury on the motorway, the United States probably provides care that is second to none. But in managing people with diabetes, people with hypertension, people with, the many other chronic diseases, we do that poorly. And we do that at a cost that is about twice as much per person as the other developed economies. And that has been for decades very painful for me. But to transform healthcare to make it more effective and more affordable, not just a better source of revenue, we have to change in the United States the way we are paid. We have to change the way physicians are paid. And that's hard. And it's become more hard because there is a gigantic deficit of trust of leadership in the United States. Less so in Switzerland. And we acknowledge that and look forward to learning it. So every year, for 40 years, the Gallup organization has done a poll of Americans asking them how much they trust various public institutions in America. And they do this every summer. So the most recent poll was from July of this year. So the question is, now I'm going to read you a list of institutions in America Please tell me how much confidence you yourself have in each one. Do you have a great deal? Do you have quite a lot? Do you have some or very little or none at all? And they've done this poll for many years. And so here are the institutions that they ask about. It's interesting on healthcare, they call it the medical system here, as though we have a medical system in the United States. It's just confusion, you know. We don't even have insurance for everybody. But anyway, it's the healthcare we get in the United States. You can see all these other things. So I would ask you, what institutions do you think Americans trusted most, and what institutions do you think Americans trusted the least? And then I'll show you the results. So be brave, tell us what you think Americans said, and then you can think about what you would say.
Maybe also highly political.
It's highly political.
For example, if you on the right side, the fourth line.
The U.S. presidency. How much trust is there in the U.S. presidency, do you think?
I believe it depends who you ask.
Very much, yes. I think your microphone's not on. It depends very much on who you ask. America has become extremely polarized politically, just as you indicate. What's trusted in the United States, though, do you think? What's most trusted? Church? I'm sorry, somebody else? Oh, the military. Ah, interesting. See, I grew up in the Vietnam era. Military not so trusted, right? I was in college. Business, big business or small business? Bigger businesses. Okay, well, what do you most trust in Switzerland? Small businesses. Magnifique. Americans are more like you than you thought, I'm sorry. Small business most trusted. Military, you were right. That surprised me when I first saw that, because it used to, when I was in college, military not trusted because of Vietnam, right? But it's become really interesting. Science is really trusted, because I thought that, and this is actually the first year that they had science on their survey, and I thought it would be down lower because of the reactions to COVID in the United States, which was entirely against science, but still trusted. The police, which interested me too. Well, look at the medical system there. So some Americans say, oh, it's pretty good. We're above the middle. Well, if you look at those numbers, though, 32% think that they trust healthcare a great deal. Means that 2/3 of the people have only some or very little trust in their health system in the United States. How can we take care of people at the most dependent and critical moments of their lives, or the lives of the people they love, when most of them don't really trust us? Now, they do trust their individual nurse and their individual doctor more, but overall, not much trust. And this, as I say, this has been steadily, the survey has gone on every year for many years, but the level of trust in all these things has gone down in the United States. That was something that motivated me greatly as we were thinking about a new kind of leaders that can instill trust in those they lead, and trust the people who receive care feel trust. So people would say, well, what's happened to trust? It declined, at least in the United States, maybe not so much in Switzerland. We'll talk about that in a minute. But around the world, it certainly has in everything. And so when I asked people a few years ago, why is trust going down? This is what they said. In healthcare, it's because of COVID. I say, well, COVID just came along. It may be made the lack of trust worse, but this trust level has been going down for 25 years. So I think the better question is not what happened to trust, but really what happened to leaders. Because I think leaders have changed. at least in the United States, not just in healthcare certainly, but the example of leaders, as we can see, at the highest levels of government in the United States. Their values have changed dramatically, and that affects the whole society. So we are a very small voice, kind of crying in the wilderness sometimes, talking about a new kind of leadership here, one that engenders trust. Now, here is a recent book about the 7 rules of power. You can see that, written by a professor at Stanford University, whose name is Jeffrey Pfeffer. He's a tenured professor at Stanford, has been a professor there for over 40 years. He's a best-selling author. This is his most recent book, The 7 Rules of Power, which is widely read by business executives. Some healthcare leaders read it. It's quoted a lot. So let me read to you. I won't make you read the whole book. You can get it if you want, if you dare. But let me just share with you his 7 rules of power. And forgive me, I just don't want to misquote him, so I'm going to actually read. His first principle is get out of your own way. He says, even if you doubt your own abilities, rewrite your self-perception with a strong positive narrative. Some qualities, like being likable, humble, and authentic, are detrimental to building power. Celebrate your central role as the leader of your team in any successes. Don't celebrate your team, celebrate your role as the leader. Never self-disclose weakness. Break the rules. Rules don't favor you, they were created to support the power of others. By breaking some established rules, you subvert the status quo and the power dynamics of others in charge. You should evaluate the risks before you break the rules, but the consequences are often not as bad as you might expect. Most of the time, nothing happens. Do these rules sound familiar? Maybe some American leaders read this book or wrote it. Appear powerful. First impressions are important and they're made very quickly, after which the brain doesn't like to spend energy to change them. Project high levels of self-confidence. When people observe confidence, they subconsciously translate it into competence. Repeat your ideas and themes over and over. People are more likely to judge repeated statements as true compared to new ones. Avoid low-power behaviors like humility and apologizing. Build a powerful personal brand. Create a personal style that exudes confidence and success. Associate with prestigious people and organizations. Craft your personal story as a hero's journey and share your hero journey repeatedly. Network relentlessly. Self-promotion and using others for your own gain may seem unpleasant at first, but that belief is limiting and overlooks the fact that you're building a community of support and that you have just as much a right to be part of the influential group as anyone else. Use your power. When you reach a new position, don't waste the honeymoon period. Act fast and make big moves. Surprise others, catch them off guard. Their brains freeze as they try to react to the new situation, and critics will have a difficult time to respond to speed. Don't let potential resistance to change gain any traction. Bring in new people, get rid of the old. Bring people who share your style and vision. And then finally, success excuses almost everything. Saying that history is written by the winners only explains part of the story. In reality, the winners not only write history, but they can rewrite it over time to present their actions and accomplishments in the best possible light. Once power is obtained, people often overlook how it was acquired. Now, some people I talked to, I said, should I share this in our leadership program? And they said, no, people will think that you're recommending this. I hope nobody thinks that. Yes?
Is it real, or is it meta-analysis of showing how not to do?
No, it is real. And the question was, is this real? Is this really what he's saying? Is it a meta-analysis of all this stuff? I mean, this is what Professor Pfeffer says will give you power and create more power, more wealth, more influence. He says very specifically, I'm not saying that these things are necessarily good. It's just the fact of how people get and retain power. And that may be true, but it's just kind of, you know, to say, well, that's like inventing a new weapon and then saying, well, you just use it however you want, whether it's for good or evil, when most weapons are only made to destroy. So anyway, I just think it's useful to understand this because there are so many leaders in the world, very sadly, including at the highest levels of leadership in the United States, who could have written this book, who certainly behave this way. So it's important for those of us who think that we need a different kind of leadership to understand what they're doing. That's why I share it. So what effect do these behaviors have on an organization or a country? We won't stop to ponder that because I think you all get it. This is a dear friend of mine, Greg Mattis, who is a healthcare lawyer, and he has become now the Chief Legal Officer of Intermountain Health, and he teaches in our program. And he shares this little story. Greg, in his spare time, likes to garden and grow fruit and vegetable in his backyard. So every year, he goes to the store and buys little plants. These are little broccoli plants that he bought at the store in the springtime, and he planted them in his yard. Well, 3 months later, this is what those plants look like. Now, he filled up his planting area with those plants, and he had one plant left over, which he just set aside there. But it got the same amount of sunlight and water as those other plants that became very large. What is the difference? He left it by itself, so it couldn't thrive on its own. That's part of it. What else? It's outside the box. What's in the box? Convention. Oh, well, now you're going the wrong direction now. I'm sorry. It's inside the box, but it's also, Greg talks about this, he spent 10 years putting organic material and fertilizers and minerals in that box, cultivating a rich soil for the plants to grow. And the other one couldn't even grow its roots at all because it's in a tiny box, a limited space, but it didn't have the same nourishment. Now, when we grow plants, especially plants for eating, we call it agriculture. Plant culture. So really the difference here between these plants is the culture in which they're living and growing. And I think it's a marvelous example of the importance of culture. Now, you all are creating a culture here at HUG with leadership that is responsible, leadership that is participative, that engages others, and this culture that adapts to the changing environment. And I was so delighted to see this and read about your work here. You're creating a new institutional vision, and I love this part, to offer a caring, stimulating, and motivating work environment. A caring, stimulating, and motivating work environment. A culture that allows the people that work here to give the best of themselves. And as we like to say, creating a work environment where people can grow and people can thrive, where people can find joy and meaning in their work. And just reading about what you're doing here, it's very inspiring to me. I already asked Idris if I could come work here. He said, you're too old. But I think it would be a wonderful place to work. So let's talk for a minute about les qualités imaginaires. I can't say it. The management qualities at HUG, okay? Sorry, I wish I could speak French. The hug, yes. Integrity. Humanity. Humility. Optimism. And this self-awareness, if I interpret that right. I think this is amazing. So my question for you is, most organizations have values and a mission statement that's posted on the wall. Is that what creates the culture? Do these create the culture of HUG? Oui or no? Do they? Huh? It's not enough. What else is needed? To live it. That's exactly right. I know so many places with leaders that have values that are almost as good as your values, your leadership management qualities, but whose leaders don't ever think about those. And they certainly think that those values are for other people, not for themselves. Now, leaders like the ones that I've met here, they have a different approach. These values are something they think about every day. And they think to themselves, I have to live these values more perfectly than anybody else because I'm a leader. I'm held personally accountable. I hold myself accountable to these values. But that was what we were not seeing in the United States for the 20 years that I was in a senior management position in healthcare. We saw it in a few places, but it was shamefully too few places. These values are incredibly important. The mission and purpose of the organization are incredibly important, but they mean nothing if we all as leaders don't fully embrace them and hold ourselves personally accountable to the highest level. So a little quick story. This is me in New York City. Well, I'm not there, but it looks like a picture of our medical school class. Our medical school class at Cornell in New York City in 1973 looked just like these people. And it was an exciting time for me. I'd always wanted to go to medical school. I loved it. It was a wonderful place. So in the first semester at medical school, they separated our class. There were 100 young people in our class, and we were in groups of 4, and we met once a week for an hour and a half with a senior emeritus professor who talked about becoming a doctor. And it was about the second or third week we were there, our leader began the session by saying, "What is a professional? What makes someone a professional?" And there were 4 of us. So I'll ask you, what makes somebody a professional? Skills. Attitude.
Professionalism.
Well, yes, certainement, oui. Well, what is professionalism then? Huh? Mastery of the craft. Excellent. Well, so there were 4 people in the group, and the first person said, an expert, or a professional is an expert. And the next person said, well, in medicine, it's a person who has demonstrated their expertise by passing their board exams. And then somebody else said, it's somebody who passed the board exams, but then becomes a doctor's doctor, you know, that the doctors themselves go to. And I don't remember what I said. Well, our professor said, well, those are all good things. Then the professor said, but you know, I've always believed, and this was a long time ago, 51 years ago, that there are three great professions. Certainly we think there are more now, but she said 3 great professions. And she said they are the law, la loi, the clergy, le clergé, oui, and medicine, la médecine. 3 professions. And a professional is somebody who puts the best interests of their client, their parishioner, or their patient ahead of their own personal interests. I've never forgotten that. And as I was enculturated at Cornell Medical School and through residency training and in my early years of practice, that I was surrounded by people who behaved that way, who never complained about being called in the middle of the night when they hadn't had enough sleep to take care of somebody, who were never doing things just to make more money, but they were honestly trying to do the best they could to help the patient recover from an illness or an injury. And so this strong enculturation was extremely important to me. And I think, sadly, we've lost it too much in the United States. So what makes a trusted leader? We believe that certainly you need competence, we need the skills. Nobody trusts a leader who doesn't know anything about what they're doing. And that's really the focus of virtually all the healthcare management programs in the United States, all the MBA programs in the United States. They're all on competence, the skills. And very little is talked about what we call character. And I appreciate that Idris mentioned to you that character has a somewhat different meaning in French than it does in English. Character in English has to do with your values, your leadership, your personal traits that come to define you. And we'll talk more specifically about what character is. But it's really this combination, we believe, of character plus competence that leads to trusted leadership. And trusted leadership is what we need these days in healthcare and in the world in general, in business, to really move forward with positive change, because the challenges are difficult. So many people have to do things in new ways with different incentives, different rewards for what they do. And we need to have trusted leaders to do that. So our focus in our program is a little bit more character-based. Now, you know, we all know as leaders that you have to be smart. Here's the cover of this publication. You may know of Scientific American a few years ago. You are inner genius, and obviously she's very genius because she wears glasses and she has Albert Einstein hairdo, right? So she's very smart. And so clearly you need to be intelligent. You need to have a level of intelligence to be a good leader. But really, there are other things that may be even more important. So I would ask you, what about emotions in leadership? Because we see emotions on strong display in leadership around the world. We certainly do now. It's appalling sometimes how much emotion is on display, especially angry sorts of emotions. Well, Daniel Goleman, who invented the whole concept of emotional intelligence, says, despite the great value that business culture often places on our intellect, without emotion, emotions are, in a very real sense, more powerful than our intellect, because they stimulate a part of our brain that's very ancient and very powerful, and really guides the way we are. And so this is a wonderful book. If you want to read a book by Danny Goleman, it's his more recent one, Primal Leadership. The emotional tasks of the leader is primal. Primal means it's core. It's the primary, most important part of leadership. It's the first and most important act of leadership. So he talks about emotional intelligence from understanding and managing yourself, and understanding and managing others. So he has, like everybody who went to business school, has a box with 4 squares in it. And in self, you are self-aware when you are able to recognize your own emotions and what you're thinking about, and how that's impacting, how your emotions are impacting others, that you're self-reflective and you understand your own strengths and limitations. Does this sound a little bit like one of the qualities of leadership at HUG? Yes. Self-management, you have emotional self-control, you're transparent, you're adaptable, and you have optimism. Oh, by the way, you're welcome to take pictures. I didn't tell Idris yet, but I'm happy to share a PDF of these slides with you at the end, okay? Okay, the social, which is, awareness of the social situation around you. You have empathy. You sense the emotions of others. You take an active interest in others. Again, he must have, Goldman must have read what you published here, they're sincerely interested in others. You're aware of the organization and you recognize needs. And finally, in managing others, you're able to inspire those you lead, not just say, this is what we're going to do. We have to create a vision of a greater future and say, we can get there. And a great leader then defines the steps of how to get there. You don't get there overnight. You don't get there tomorrow. You probably never actually get to the ideal. But each day or each month or each year, you can show people we're making progress to that greater thing. And that's too much of what we lack today among leaders. It's just all sort of reactive to things rather than helping people see a greater possibility of a greater future and define a real path to get there. And then building bonds and building teams and managing conflict well. So, are emotions contagious? Yes. What kind of emotions are contagious? Joy, did you say? Yeah. All of them? Most of them. Actually, laughter is very contagious. If we start laughing, it's hard not to laugh. We all do that to our children when they're young and they're in a bad mood and they say, I can make you smile, Very contagious. Depression actually is an emotion, but it's not very contagious. And it may be one of the reasons why we're not as empathetic as we should be, as we need to be for people who are having depression. But others are extremely contagious. The emotion of creating fear and the emotions of creating specifically fear of others who are different from you and motivating by fear is very contagious. And we see some leaders in public places these days who lead by creating fear of others. It's also demagoguery. Demagoguery is creating, using stereotypes to create fear of others and gaining power because of that fear. So Daniel Goleman goes on to further expand, and he says, if you look at people's competence in emotional intelligence, you have some people who are what he calls resonant leaders and others who are discordant leaders. And he says those who are resonant leaders understand the feelings of others. They are people who move others in a positive direction, and they give people hope for the future. We create a vision of a better future and a path to get there. Well, discordant leaders, rigid hierarchy and excessive command and control, coercion or inappropriate reward, do this or I will fire you. Or, having your friends come in and promote them, the people who just say what you want them to say, and then paying them a lot of money, giving them a higher position. Demagoguery we just talked about. Command and control. So help me with this one, because I loved medical school and residency training, but I have to say that with a few exceptions, the way we learned about leadership in medical school and residency was largely through command and control leadership. the person who knew the most about the medulla oblongata and had published the most became the chairman of the Department of Neurology, because they were well published. Everybody in their society knew them around the country, and they got promoted. And once they got there, they say, well, since I know everything about the medulla oblongata, I must know more than everybody else about everything. And so they think the world would be a great place if everybody does things my way. Now, I don't know if that's true in medicine in Europe or not, but it was very true in healthcare. And sadly, it was especially true among my profession, surgeons. You know, because you're at the operating room and you're doing your big operation, and all of a sudden the aorta and the vena cava start bleeding, and you don't say, well, Linda, what do you think we should do? Bob, what's our next step? You say, clamp, sew it up, right? And so, you know, I was trained in surgery training, that is the captain. You're the captain of the ship in the operating room, and what you say goes. And if people don't do it, then that's mutiny. That is not a great leadership style. It just isn't. It isn't participative. It isn't understanding the needs of others. So I think, you know, my experience is there are some physicians that naturally are more collaborative and others can learn. But at least the native way that most physicians in the United States grew up, they don't make the best leaders. They understand the science and they kind of understand the culture of healthcare, but too often they don't understand these leadership principles, but they can be learned. So just down here, small, amazing to me how many of these themes that you have written are highlighted by the work of Danny Goleman. I love this. Maya Angelou, who's a poet, a writer. I've learned that people will forget what you said and forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Emotions and leadership. Okay, let's talk about a little neuroscience. Now, we probably have neurologists here, so forgive me. I'm just a surgeon, so I don't know neurology, but I know a little bit about it. So you're out swimming in the Florida swamp, and you're pedaling along, and you see this. What happens in your brain? Fear. Fear. So what do we call this response in our brain? We call it in English the fight or flight reflex. We either get ready to fight or we get ready to run. And what does that do to our body? What does it stimulate? The heart, which the sympathetic nervous system goes, alert, alert, you know, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, catecholamines go up, we get jittery and shaky, right? And blood flow is diverted to where? The muscles. Blood flow to the brain, not so much. Goes down, actually. So we're not, you know, we're acting really fast to run or to fight, but our brain kind of doesn't really. That's why people who are in a scary situation, they ask them after, well, what were you thinking? So I don't know, I didn't even think. I can't believe what happened. You know, I actually punched the bear in the nose, you know, and it ran away. I talked to a guy who said that. He didn't think about it. So it all starts in this little part of the brain, the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, the most ancient part of the brain, which sometimes people call the reptile brain. You know, the reptile brain helps us respond to an alligator, I guess, huh? But it stimulates the release of these stress hormones, catecholamines, stress steroids, heart rate goes up, all that kind of stuff. And there's this interesting work by a guy named David Rock, who talked about the SCARF model in an article he wrote in a journal of neurology. about 20 years ago, and he said that there are things that can stimulate the fight or flight response just like a bear or an alligator or a shark. One of them is when our status or our relative importance to others is challenged by a change in the organization. Another is when our ability to protect the relatively near future, our certainty, is challenged. I kind of like to know what's going to happen. And we can't always, but it kind of makes me nervous. I kind of like to be able to say, yeah, this is what's going to happen next. Autonomy, how well we can control events. It's sad to think about it, but some people have almost no autonomy at all. You know, the decisions are forced upon them. And that's why, and so when we're in that kind of a circumstance, I think that marvelous book by Viktor Frankl, who was a prisoner in a concentration camp under the Nazis, is so profound, because you can control your own self even when others control that. I mean, it's a book called Man's Search for Meaning. But most of us like to be able to control events, relatedness, our sense of belonging in a group, in our family, and the people with whom we work, and with our friends. And then finally is fairness. And disruptions in any of these things, they create scenarios, they put people in a PET scanner, and then they scan and see the brain activity, and they see that changing one of these things, they're all hooked up to the machine, and they say, oh, by the way, I just got a call from your boss, and your position has been eliminated. And the same parts of the brain light up that they would in a fear response, with the same kind of things happening, you know, increased heart rate, increased stress hormones, stress steroids, and decreased flow to the brain. So we don't think so well. So how about just get around with your table, and let's just practice these a little bit, and think about, why don't you each create a little scenario where one of these things would be challenged in a work environment, and how you, if the leader, if you've got to make a change in relationships or change in the way the organization is done, or something else might affect somebody. And it doesn't need to be a work, it could be a personal thing. Here's some examples. Well, some examples, just think of one. Say if you're 9 years old and you're the only child, and one day your mom and dad say, hey, we need to talk to you. We're going to adopt a new sister for you on Friday. Would that threaten any of these things here, your status, your certainty, your autonomy? So how would parents manage that? Or another example with children, we were just talking about it on the walk over here this morning. What about when your 12-year-old says, I need a smartphone? I mean, all those things are status to your autonomy, your relationship with others in that case. Anyway, so why don't you all think of a little thing, and then we'll just have a few of your tables, have a spokesman, we'll have a few of your tables say, well, here's the scenario, and here's how we, as a group, could manage it. You can pick from any of these things on each table. Sometimes we just assign each group, but I'll just have you do whichever one you want. Think of a scenario, and then how would you manage it so it's better? And please, as Idris invited you, anytime you need to go get some coffee so you can stay awake.
cet espoir
Okay, we'll give you 2 more minutes, and then if those of you who want to give an example and how you would manage it, we can do that. And we'll then just finish up on this topic and then take a bit of a break, okay? 2 minutes, oui. Eh bien, 1 minute and then a report, then we take break. Okay, let's come back, take 5 minutes, and then we will take a break. So anybody want to volunteer to share their idea of a situation and how you would manage that? Maybe it's at work, maybe it's with your family or others. En français ou en anglais? Oh. Personne? Ah oui, the brave people.
So yeah, I suggested a situation that we often live in as a pediatrician in a maternity hospital, where we have to announce to a parent that he cannot take home the baby that was just born because of family situations. So it's a huge situation of fight and flight reaction by the parent, because the parent is, all the 5 groups are touched by the situation. And it challenges the leadership or the physician that has to do that, how to control the situation of fight and flight reaction.
Excellent scenario. So can you suggest some things that we might do when we are the physician talking to this family?
So on the table, we talked about your prior sentence, that they don't remember what you said. But they remember what they felt when you said it. And so we think that we need to address this feeling of the parent at this moment and try to establish empathy, and then maybe go back to these 5 points and show the parent that not everything is lost, that he can actually regain status, he can regain looking what will be happening in the future, he can regain some control by showing what he's able to do, and we can reassure that the child will always, to some extent, he will always be the parent, and that we are working on the fairness. So that's what we discussed.
That's excellent. A great example and very wise approach. And you know, it occurs to me that in this kind of a situation, at least in the United States, too many caregivers are always short of time. I've got to get this done, then go do something. I have to go do a procedure. And sometimes, whether we're talking to parents who won't be able to take the child home or a single parent for whatever reason, we give the message, we try to be nice, and then we leave. But sometimes just like sitting with somebody who's received very bad news about their medical condition, just being quiet and sitting with people and letting them have time to think about it for a moment and ask the questions. That conveys the empathy that you just mentioned. I think that's lovely. Fabulous example. Anybody else want to share an example? Oh, there we go. Yes. Merci. Here. Got it.
Okay. So we took an example related to fairness, and we took a purely hypothetical example where we're being asked to cut costs. And there may be two different approaches. If we imagine that every department is being asked to reduce their budget in a linear way, it's something we could accept. But if one department is being asked to cut costs much more than the other, without any explanation, well, there's clearly a sense of unfairness. And probably a way to address the issue properly is to have a discussion, to explain why having your department cut costs a bit more than others could actually help prioritize and have a greater impact on the people we're trying to save here, because we're sparing medical departments, for example. So again, it's really the approach, the time you're going to take to explain why you're doing something and not something else.
That's a wonderful example too, thank you. And it just reminds me of the whole conversation here, which is about developing trusted leadership. So many times I've seen in health systems in the United States where the leader comes in and says, we have to cut costs here. So the people on the front line, the nurses and the doctors say, well, that will hurt our patients. Well, we need to do it. That's the purpose of our organization. And without trust, most people at the front line, the doctors and the nurses say, oh, they only want to make more money themselves. So they're hurting the patients so that the organization can make more money. There's enough money to go around. And that's a great example of being aware of the pain and the need to help people understand that everybody's making sacrifice. You are not alone. And I'm going to help you to figure out a way to do it, but also the importance of having trust in leadership. Well, let's just move on and then we'll get to our break. And just to finalize this, here's some ways to think about moderating the SCARF response. One way is to never use more power than you need in a situation. If there's a fly on the wall, use a fly swatter, not a baseball bat, right? And sometimes we overuse power. We're powerful and we can just order people around, but being gentle actually can increase your power with people because people recognize that you are not overusing it. Empowering others is powerful. Giving people responsibilities, saying to someone, I'm going to trust you to do this. You know, you need to tell me what you're going to do and how it's going to happen, but you're in charge here. You make the decision. And that's sometimes hard for us in medicine, particularly for physicians. It's something that I learned I had to do in the operating room. I had to let the residents do critical parts of the operation. I tried never to let them do any part that I couldn't fix it if they made a mistake, right? But sometimes you can say, oh, I could do this really quickly and I know it would go well, and you have to let somebody else try, but that helps them grow. And their appreciation and gratitude for you giving them that increases the trust they have in you. I love this. Simon Sinek is an American writer, and he talks about leadership. But a star wants to see herself rise to the top, but a true leader wants to see others become stars. Take that, Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford. I mean, that's not what he's teaching, but others recognize that. Forgiving and apologizing is, and Jeffrey Pfeffer says, never apologize. That's a weak behavior. Let me tell you a quick story. So many years ago, more than 20 years ago, in our state of Utah, there were some people that ran investor-owned for-profit health systems and imaging facilities and surgical centers who were angry that Intermountain, which has an insurance company, didn't pay for patient services at their investor-owned places. They paid for it at Intermountain not-for-profit hospitals and clinics. So they got some legislators who they gave donations to. That's how it works in the United States. I hope not in Switzerland, but who ran a law that said if you cannot in our state have an organization that owns hospitals, owns a health plan, and has employed physicians. So it would make it so it'd have to take apart Intermountain Healthcare. And there were doctors that owned these surgical centers and these other things that came and testified before the hearings of the legislature. And they didn't have to say like you do in court, I will tell the truth. They could just say whatever they wanted. And so some of them got up there and said these awful things about Intermountain that weren't true. Like, we had, the executives had a private airplane and we're having retreats in exotic locations, and we had money in the Cayman Islands and blah, blah, blah. And I went to those things, and it was appalling. And there was one doctor that I really had respected who was one of the people who owned one of those things, and he said some bad things that were totally untrue about Intermountain. Well, the legislature decided to hire an external consultant that looked at the situation for 1 year, and they came back and said, we don't see what's wrong here. You have high quality health care at the lowest per person cost in the United States. Seems like things are going well. So end of case. But I never forgot that doctor who had said those untrue things about Intermountain and some of the people there. But I knew he was a good doctor. So about 3 or 4 years later, I was the CEO of Intermountain, and I was attending a report meeting from a part of the company where this doctor worked, and they were going on and on about saying how great a job he was doing at leading this physician initiative. And I'm not a very good poker player, so they could see me going, rolling my eyes and, expressing, well, okay, whatever kind of an attitude. So after the meeting, our vice president who ran that region said, Charles, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, sure. He says, can we do it in your office? I said, yeah, come in right here. So he sits down and he has a few things to say that are nice. And he says, so I noticed when we talked about this doctor, you weren't happy. I said, yeah, well, probably not. He says, you need to forgive him. He's doing a good job. And I said, yeah, whatever. And so he told me, well, no, he's doing a good job, and you really need to get over it. So I said, okay, and we both had to go, but I thought about it, and I thought, I'm not going there. The guy said things that were untrue in a public setting that was printed in the newspaper and all this. But it kind of kept bothering me. So 2 weeks later, I called up his assistant and I said, hey, I'm going to come down to your area. Can I visit with this doctor in a couple of weeks? Oh, yes. So I go to his office. And we go in, and he's got this little table that's about this big, and I'm sitting on this side of the table, and he's sitting on this side of the table. And we talked, and he said, so, what's up? Why are you here? And I said, well, I have to tell you that I haven't been thinking great things about you for a few years. And I came to ask for your forgiveness for not getting past what happened at the legislature, and I want to tell you thank you for the good job you're doing. So now this doctor, he's a little older than I am, very, very powerful in his community, very respected, and he's a surgical specialist, so pretty good ego too. How do you think he responded to my sincere apology? Did you say he started crying and apologized back? That's a possibility. Other possibilities? He was perplexed. He's going, huh? What?
But he is a very strong character will say, well, thank you for realizing your mistake.
Thank you for realizing your mistake. Excellent. So what happened is we're sitting in this chair, so I say this, and he stands up. He's just looking at me. He walks around the thing, so I stand up, and I didn't know if I stand up, and he grabs me and gives me this hug, a full-on guy hug, you know. And he said, thank you. And then I could tell he was crying. He said, I'm sorry too. This is a powerful man. I never expected this result. And he said, this means more to me than I can express. I will get emotional thinking of it again, huh? And after that, he became a dear friend. And when we had difficult things to do in that part of our organization, I could always count on him. He wasn't just a yes man who said, well, whatever he says. No. He still had his own ideas. But when people would say, well, I don't agree with this, then he could say, I've talked to Charles about this, and let me explain a little bit more. And it just became, it's something that I would have missed, is this dear friend who I still think about with fondness and even love, not eros, you know, but philia, brotherly love, familial love, agape, godlike love, caring about others. So anyway, it was a great lesson for me, and I, of course, had to thank my friend, the vice president, who ordered me to apologize. So, not ordered.
What made you change your mind and going to meet?
Yeah, good. What made me change my mind and go meet with him? I guess it's because I really believe in these principles that we're talking about. I hadn't really elaborated them, explicitly said them as well as I think about them now, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And because I trusted my friend to say, this is a good man and you need to get over it. So it's nice to have friends, and so many times I've been blessed as a leader to have people who reported to me who told me what they honestly think. Sometimes as a leader, it's hard. People just want to tell you what they think you want to hear. It's the biggest danger of leadership, I think. Some leaders, as you know, surround themselves by people who only say what they want to hear. That's a dangerous place. And we see that once again at the highest levels these days. Okay, when we come back, we're going to tell a little story of history of the United States, but let's take about 15 minutes. So come back at 11:15 and we'll resume our adventures.
Your warmth, it dances on my skin. A fire ignites deep within. Through the clouds you always shine. A love eternal, yours and mine.
Un spectacle qui compte vraiment. On l'attendait depuis si longtemps qu'il faut le voir au moins une fois dans sa vie.
It's another tequila sunrise, staring slowly across the sky. People stay just a little bit longer. We wanna play just a little bit longer. The promoter don't mind, and the union don't mind. If we take a little time and we leave it all behind, sing one more song. Oh, won't you stay? Just a little bit longer. Please, 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 say you will. Say you will. Take a little time and leave us all behind. Sing one more song.
At TalkTalk, you get more value for your money. Sign up now, save big, and enjoy seamless browsing. Join TalkTalk.
Die Stimmung ist grundsätzlich immer mega gut. Ja, es ist eine Freude, wenn Sie so zusammenarbeiten. ist wichtig.
I thought I could let it all go, but your shadow follows. It knows the laugh we shared, the way you'd stay. Even in the dark, you lit my way. Your voice still echoes in my head. Whispered dreams of what we said. The clock keeps ticking, but it won't erase the way you smile, that warm embrace. I miss you anyway. Can't help but feel the hole you left. It just won't heal. I told myself I'd be okay, but I miss you anyway. The coffee's cold, your chair is bare. I swear I see you everywhere. The songs we loved, they cut so deep. They wake the memories I tried to keep. If I could turn back the hands of time, would I still lose you? Will you still be mine? The waters haunt me every night. I see you fading, but I hold on tight. I miss you anyway. Can't help but feel the hole you left. It just won't heal. I told myself I'd be okay, but I miss you anyway. I'll miss you anyway. Can't help but feel the hole you left. It just won't heal. I told myself I'd be okay, but I miss you anyway. I see you laugh under the moonlight's glow. Your smile is secret, the stars seem to know. I stay in shadows where my heart can hide. The words I can't say burn me inside. Tell me something, girl. Are you happy in this modern world? Or do you need more? Is there something else you're searching for? I'm falling. In all the good times I find myself for a change, and in the bad times I feel myself. Tell me something, boy. Are you tired trying to fill that void? Or do you need more? Ain't it hard keeping it so hardcore? I'm falling. In all the good times I find myself longing for a change, and in the bad times I feel myself. I'm off the deep end, watch as I dive in. I'll never meet the ground. Crash to the surface where they can hurt us. We're far from the shallow now. In the shallow. In the shallow. In the shallow. We're far from the shallow now. Oh, oh. Stay a little longer, take a little longer to pack up your bags. You're moving too fast, make me wanna hate you, so I don't have to miss you or make a mistake. So someone's to blame. I can't stand these four walls without you inside them. Build us a castle, but then leave me in silence. What if I tangled some rope on your feet into the ocean, 'cause I'm in too deep. People stay just a little bit longer. We wanna play just a little bit longer.
System, there we go. Not too loud, that'll keep people awake. It's okay, right? Yeah. Okay, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States in the election of 1860. It was a time of great controversy in the United States, and Lincoln was pretty unknown. He had been in the Congress, not in the Senate, but the lower body of the legislature for a little while, but was from the very rural parts of the United States, didn't have an elite education, but amazingly in the debates, he had the ability to captivate audiences with stories and with his way of saying things. He connected with people, and so to the surprise of many was elected the President of the United States during a time of great turmoil, because there was this controversy over slavery in the United States, which was a terrible thing, obviously. And Lincoln and other people of his party thought it should be abolished, and the other side thought that we need to continue. So, but he won the election, and he was inaugurated as the president, I think, in March of 1861. Shortly afterwards, the Civil War began, with the South rebelling and saying we have the rights to have our slaves, they're our property, and the North saying no, we can't have a country that endures slavery any longer. And so the Civil War started very early in Lincoln's presidency. The commanding general of the United States Army was a man named Sherman, General Sherman. He was older, and they weren't doing well, whereas the Southern armies, the Confederate, they called it, the Confederacy of the United States in favor of slaves, they had a very good general, General Lee, and the South was winning all the battles, so Lincoln needed to get a new general. So consulting with his advisors, they selected this man, George McClellan, who was from a very privileged family in the northern part, or in Virginia, actually, in the United States. But he had gone to all the elite schools. He had a very socially connected, wealthy family. He had gone to West Point, the military academy, had an elite education there. It was said he was very handsome, which Lincoln famously always, said, I realize I'm not a good-looking person. One time somebody said, well, you're a two-faced liar, to Lincoln, which is an expression. Two-faced means that you'd say one thing one time and another. He said, well, if I had two faces, do you think I'd be wearing this one? But anyway, they selected George McClellan as the commander of the Union Army, which is the army of the northern United States, and expected him to go and engage General Lee of the South. But he just kept rehearsing out there, doing drills in the areas around Washington instead of going and engaging the enemy. And so Lincoln kept saying, you got to go out there and fight. And he said, well, we're not ready yet. We don't have enough men. We don't have enough supplies. We're getting ready to engage. And it went on and on and on. And George McClellan became known for blaming any failures on other people, never accepting responsibility, including blaming Lincoln. And it became quite widely publicly known that McClellan in the circles would say that Lincoln didn't know anything about fighting a war, and that George McClellan was the only one that knew anything, and how bad Lincoln was. Well, this got worse and worse, and by November, Lincoln said, we've got to get a new general of the armies, or we got to change something. So he actually, the way they communicated in those days was the president would go to the general's home in the evening to meet with him. So Lincoln, along with two people, the Secretary of State and then Lincoln's personal secretary, went to General McClellan's home one evening. And the secretary said, the president wishes to speak with General McClellan. And the butler, the person at the door, said, the general is out for the evening attending a party. And they said, well, this is important, we'll wait. So they sat in the front room there of the general's home for like an hour. After a while, they heard somebody at the front door, and in comes General McClellan dressed in his full military dress, you know, with all his medals and his uniform and his broadsword at the side, and walks past the president and his fellows there, looks at them, just continues up the grand staircase to the other upper level, and opens the door and goes in there and shuts the door. So they wait for another half an hour for him to come back, and then the president's assistant says to the butler, well, is the general coming back down again? And the butler said, I'll check. So he goes up the stairs, and in 5 minutes comes back down and says to the presidential party, the general wishes me to inform you that he has retired for the evening. He's gone to bed. Now, so I'm going to promote you, and now you are the President of the United States. And you've learned all these things about scarf and all this kind of stuff. So what would you do if you were the President of the United States? Why don't you talk about that in your group for 3 minutes or so, or 4, and then tell the rest of us what your group would do if you were Abraham Lincoln in that situation. Does the situation make sense to everybody? Oui? Okay, go. Oui.
C'est tellement important qu'on attend. Il était assis dans la vestibule et il revient, il les voit, il passe, il continue à sa chambre à coucher, il se met au
C'est à quel moment que l'on
voilà, c'est ça.
Ah, mais je pense que c'est pas que je le rendez-vous, c'est que je lui envoie une carriole.
Il était
cet article le lendemain dans la matinée, puis après il apprendra.
Parce que c'est comme c'est une hiérarchie militaire, n'obéis pas, tu as le droit de le tuer. Moi je proposerais par rapport à la situation. Non, parce qu'on est par rapport à la situation, moi j'aurais pris c'est un majordome, qui est à la maison. Si le majordome, nous, en général, nous sommes là pour destituer Je sais que le message est passé. Est-ce qu'il a envie d'être écouté ou pas? C'est-à-dire, si j'étais le président, je n'aurais pas cette grande... C'est ça, mais...
L'armée, c'est pas l'histoire. J'imagine que ça doit pas.
Il y a plusieurs stratégies. J'aimerais si vous mettez ce jeu de rôle. Excellent, il y a des émotions pour réagir de la même façon. Ça ne fera pas d'état d'âme.
Ah, écoutez, non, mais insister encore, oui.
Ça n'a pas d'état d'âme à faire.
Ça fait l'entreprise d'ailleurs.
Si tu laisses l'institution et tu as tous les droits et tous les pouvoirs, c'est une chose. Si tu as ton directeur général, une direction, un chef de département, et que tu veux prendre des décisions comme chef de service,
Mais la NOM va pas le changer par contre. La NOM, elle n'est pas la chambre. Oui.
soutenue par l'ensemble de l'institution.
Parce qu'il y a un moment où il viendra.
Okay. Who wants to say what they would do if they were Lincoln? President Lincoln, what would you do? Ah, yes. Paul.
Okay, so certainly this is a really difficult situation, and the president finds himself.
Looks like it's on.
Yeah. Do you hear me? So.
So, it looks like the light's on.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay.
Better?
Another try. So certainly this is a really, really difficult situation for the president, who is who waited quite some time, and as such sees himself in a situation of an affront by his general. But on the other side, it's a very important message he needs to transmit, and probably there's no perfect solution. But at our table, we believed that here it would be justified that President Lincoln goes up the stairs and maybe disturbs his general, knocks at his room, right? Even at the risk of seeing the general in his bed. But the accuse would be, General, this is a matter of national security. Please excuse of disturbing you, and then transmitting his difficult message.
Thank you. Very good. Other possibilities? Yes.
Yeah, so bottom line. Does it work? No. So bottom line, well, I will do without the mic.
Oui, ici.
So bottom line, we were pretty aligned with what you at this table just said. On the way to solicitate the president, we were a bit discussing. Probably we thought it would be better to communicate with him through the butler, because he didn't want to take the time to discuss with the president. For whatever reason, it was no use to try to force that way. And probably the best option would have to go through the butler, saying, okay, we have a very emergent matter with a few keywords. We need to have whatever appointment within the next 12 hours. you choose the time, the location, but we need to have this discussion. So more or less that was a bit, I tried to be reflecting the discussion here, but that was a bit the idea.
Very good. Other ideas? Fire him right now? Oh, you talked about that, huh? Other ideas? Yes.
No, I just thought, like, even as at present, I would try to stay, let's say, professional and swallow my own pride and just do a official procedure to fire him.
Okay, but not go up and get him out of bed, huh?
I wouldn't go into his bedroom, no.
Yes. Okay, well, you may have some other ideas. So I've thought about this story from the first time I read it. It's in a great book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, who is a friend of ours who came and spoke at our Leadership Institute. She's an American author and won the Pulitzer Prize for her book, Team of Rivals, which talks about Lincoln when he was elected. He got some of the people who were opposed to his election, who ran against him, to be on the cabinet. So he would get lots of different input. And Secretary Seward, who was the Secretary of the Interior, was one of the people who was with Lincoln that night, and he was one of Lincoln's rivals in the election. But he brought people with different opinions in. Anyway, I could go on and on. So what would I do? Here's the stairs. I'm marching up the stairs. Oh, trips on the stairs. Or maybe just opens the door. I think that would be my natural inclination. What did Lincoln do? So according to Doris Kearns Goodwin, Lincoln stood up to the butler who said, "The general wishes to inform you." He paused for a moment. He stood up and said, "Thank you and good evening." And he turned and walked out. Now his assistant, his secretary, who would be like the chief of staff in government today, was enraged. He said, "Mr. President, you can't let him get away with that. That's insubordination. You need to go in there and we'll get him down here." And Lincoln said, paused, and then he said to young John Hay, he said, "I would be willing to hold the general's horse if it would serve the best interests of the nation. But now is not the time for pleasantries or courtesies or rash decisions. This is our country." And they left and went home. And he thought about it, and he did fire McClellan a few days later. And McClellan ended up running for president against Lincoln in 1864. Sadly, of course, shortly after that election, Lincoln was assassinated. So why do you think Lincoln did that? Why didn't he go up the stairs, which would be the natural inclination of so much of us? Well, I guess nobody, oh, you got, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite. Yes, you are exactly right. I mean, he didn't write that, but I think he recognized that we ourselves need to recognize when we are angry, we are not thinking clearly. That's exactly what I believe, is that Lincoln was so self-aware that he realized he was in no condition to talk to this man who had insulted him so deeply. And so politely he said, "Okay, we withdraw. I need to think about this and make a decision." This man was extraordinary. To me, he's the greatest example of an American leader who, if you want to read a great book about him, there's a book by a historian named John Meacham called "And There Was Light," which gives Lincoln's whole story in his growing up years. And he in his writings, you can see he struggled with two things. He struggled on the one hand with serious depression at times, to the point that he contemplated suicide before he was president, just from depression. But also he struggled with his own personal ego and need for power, which he recognized as he believed was a fault in himself. And just his own values said, that is not the person I want to be. I don't want to be a person driven by power and ego and self-interest. I want to be a servant of the people. And Idris reminded me just now that Professor Hitendra Wadhwa, who's from Columbia, who's going to be teaching here on Thursday, in his book that you'll learn about, he talks about Lincoln also. And they said that they have found writings that Lincoln had to the generals back then. He was always criticizing and said that was the worst decision in the history of the country, and you should never have done that, and here's what you should do. So where did they discover those letters? They were kept in the secret files of Lincoln. He wrote them and never sent them, which is a reminder of that great advice: when you're angry, write a letter to that person that made you angry. Say all the things you would say to them to get rid of your anger. Put it in your drawer and don't look at it for a week, and then read it again, see if you really want to send it. I just think he's just a marvelous example of leadership. Okay. So, I hope my French is not too bad. A-t-il utilisé certaines des qualités managériales que nous décrivons chez Étudier? I think Lincoln displayed at one time or another in his presidency every one of those. See, you are as brilliant as Abraham Lincoln. We did the break. Okay, so we talked about competence and character, but you raised the question, Idris did, character perhaps has a different meaning in French than it does in English. So what is character? And can character be defined? And can character be measured? So a person who turned out to be a good friend of mine, Fred Keel, who sadly died a couple of years ago, was an academic, a social psychologist. He was a consultant and an author. And he wrote this book that was published in 2015 by Harvard Business Review Press called Return on Character. And when I talked to Fred about this book, he said, I'd been a business consultant and executive coach for years, and I always believed that there was a connection between a leader's character, that is, her values and her attitudes about others, a connection between character and the results of the company. But I didn't think we had any evidence, and I didn't really even know how to define character. So he engaged his study team of about 10 colleagues that set out on this great big work project. They went to 84 initially, and then later some more, large organizations to talk to the leaders and have the leaders fill out an extensive questionnaire and then long interviews with these leaders to find out what was important to them. They talked about their history growing up, what was their family life like, who were their idols, who were their mentors in life, rather, who did they aspire to be? Were they religious people? What was their politics? What was their education, background? How long had they been in the job? They interviewed those, and then they interviewed all the other senior leaders that reported to the chief executive. And then they went down to the front line of the organization, at least 4 levels below the senior leaders. And they asked people, what do you think of this organization's leaders? What are their values? What's important to those leaders? How do you feel about working in this organization? And they've had this massive data set of all these things. And then they measured how successful the company was by a number of measures that would work for investor-owned for-profit companies, not-for-profit companies like Intermountain Health, government organizations and others. And so the things they measured, how were the return on assets of the organization, which you can measure for a not-for-profit as well as for a for-profit. What were the employee engagement scores? What did the employees think about the organization? What was the reputation of that company within its own industry? So did other health systems think that your health system was good? Did other tech companies think you had a good tech company? And then they looked at levels of risk as manifest by big lawsuits against the company for policies that they had, or when the government had to intervene and impose fines on companies. And those were the measures of success. So they went into these interviews with people with a list of a whole bunch of different things, and I mentioned some of them before. Here's a list of some of them. They had like 155 different things they were asking about, about the background and the experience of these leaders to try to figure out who they really were and what was most important to them. So now I'll ask you, it turns out he found a few things that really were strongly correlated with the success of the organization as measured by those attributes we just talked about. What do you think were some of the most important traits of leaders or experiences of leaders that made the company successful? Yes. Their childhood experiences growing up. Shapes a lot of our life, doesn't it? It's interesting when you think about that. Abraham Lincoln did not have a distinguished childhood. He hardly knew his father, who was abusive and difficult. His mother, he lost his mother pretty early in life, but childhood makes a big difference. Good. Others? Oh, be brave. Come on. Empathy and personal integrity. Wow, empathy, really? Why? Oh, maybe you could use the microphone.
In the situation, because probably it's a quite empowering tool to solve in an efficient manner different kind of conflicts that we, as a manager, need to solve. So one of the good tools, or probably an asset to this respect.
What is empathy? What's the definition of empathy that you're using?
Try to put it in a simple word, because I'm not sure I would be able to translate this in English, just to be able to go in the shoes of your...
Go in the shoes of others?
Yes.
Nice. Okay, integrity and empathy and childhood, yes.
Does gender has an influence here on the CEO? You mentioned it in your names here.
Well, I'll just tell you whatever Fred Keel finds out in his study, that there have been quite a few, you probably know this, studies about different leadership styles, example that many women have that are different than, certainly different than the toxic masculine values, although sadly, some women in leadership today, there was a really interesting book written about Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg, who is the CEO of Facebook, and the chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg. She certainly exemplified toxic masculinity in her role. So, but I think you're right. I think well, let me just put it this way. This goes beyond Fred Keel's study, but I think it's very, very important at all levels of leadership to have the skills and whatever, the intuition, whatever men and women bring together there. Great. Any others? Yes.
Yeah, I would say also your engagement within the civil society, because it enables you to have a certain distance within the organization, and to avoid perhaps something that we find within corporate, something around the truth and a dogma. And being engaged within society enables you to have a distance and to be able to perhaps to reflect a bit more.
That's awesome. Yeah, sometimes when we're so inside our own institution, we aren't really aware of what's going on around us. And also, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, it's very dangerous when you're a leader and you surround yourself only by people that you're their leader, unless you work really hard about it. They may not feel safe to tell you what you really think, but you go outside the institution, more able to hear that, I think. Well, here's what Fred Keel found. He found that 4 things in this long list were highly correlated with the success of the institution. And here they are: integrity, you mentioned that, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion. And he defined character as the consistent practice or a demonstration that we have these 4 behaviors, okay? So a little bit more about that. What is integrity? He says it means that you're there to tell the truth, that you act consistently with the principles, values, and beliefs of the organization, what we talked about a little while ago. The values and the mission statement on the wall don't create the culture. It's us as leaders, how well we adhere to those values. Standing up for what it's right. We talked about that in the breakout a little bit, you know. Most of us kind of know in our heart of hearts, maybe some people don't, but my experience is, people ask me about difficult decisions that we had to make at Intermountain. I said, well, what do you think the right thing to do is for the people we serve and the people who work here? And almost always they could say it. They said, but that's really going to be hard to do that. But in my experience, doing the right thing is almost always difficult in the short run and the best decision in the long run, both for a business reason and for integrity reasons. So in keeping promises, then responsibility is someone who takes responsibility for their own actions. Take that, Jeffrey Pfeffer, who says blame others for the actions, never admit mistakes. But integrity means I take responsibility if I'm the leader of an organization or part of the organization. I personally take responsibility for what happens here. And if it wasn't good, then I apologize. Say, I'm sorry that we made this mistake. We're learning from this and going to do better. Forgiveness. Now, this really surprised me that forgiveness was one of the 4 traits. See, I read Fred Keel's study years after I had my conversation with the doctor about forgiveness. Because, but Jeffrey Pfeffer says never seek forgiveness, never seek an apology. But it says means you let go of your own mistakes. I think that's easy for some people, hard for others. But it means that you let go of others' mistakes, but you don't excuse somebody if they do something that's dishonest, against policy, that damages the organization. But if somebody makes an honest mistake and they learn from it and they see why it was wrong, then you say, okay, I'm not going to hold on to this, but you don't forget it until they've demonstrated they learned from it, okay? And then compassion, and you mentioned empathy, Nicholas. Compassion, he defines this as a little different than empathy. Empathy is when you walk in another's shoes. It's when you feel sorry for somebody's circumstance, but compassion takes it one more step, and maybe it really is walking in their shoes. It means that if you have the ability to help that person in their difficulties, you'll do it. So empathy is I feel your pain, as Bill Clinton used to say. But compassion says, I feel your pain and I want to do something to try to help you. Sorry, that's pretty dark. Empowering others, actively caring for others, commitment to the development of others. Oh, these all sound kind of like your values. So it's interesting, he goes on to show that each of these traits have benefits for the organization. Integrity creates a culture of accountability, personal accountability and corporate accountability. Confidence in leadership comes with responsibility. If the leaders say, yep, I'm accountable, we made a mistake, here's what we're going to do to fix it, then people have more confidence in them. They're not trying to cover up mistakes. Forgiveness. Now, this is interesting. You read about in books from Silicon Valley about these tech companies, they say you got to fail fast. You learn by making mistakes. And so we forgive mistakes unless they're mistakes that were made just to benefit the person who did something wrong. But that leads to a culture of innovation and an ability to rapidly change. And compassion, not surprisingly maybe, leads to a feeling like I'm part of a group. And so, together we feel empowered, we feel supported, we have this culture where I feel I'm part of a team that cares about me, and we care about one another. So I just think it's wonderful. So he found that all these things improved when leaders were of this high character. Higher character leaders were perceived as having higher skills than those in the self-focused group, despite no discernible difference in their education, in their professional or leadership experience. People thought they're more capable, or objectively, there was no reason to think that, but that's how people saw them. They trusted them. Okay, revisit these leadership traits that you have: integrity, humanity, humility, optimism, self-awareness. Yes, Pascal.
A quick question about, you said for integrity that it was standing up for what is right.
Yes.
When do you know until which point you stand up for that, and when to step away in order to protect your integrity?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. When do you stand up for what's right? And when do you step away and maintain your integrity? I think when you're the final decision maker, I personally believe that you always do the right thing, even when it's hard. Like I said, it's in my experience and observing others, it always, in my experience, maybe not every time, but in my experience, it always has been the right thing in the long term. But what if your leader says, no, we're not going to do the right thing? Okay, well, then I think you have two choices then if you're following that leader. One is to just say, okay, well, I disagree with this. Here's why I disagree with it. And then if the leader says, well, okay, well, that's not what we're going to do, then I think you need to make the judgment personally of saying, okay, well, that's not that big a deal. It's a difference of opinion, but okay, they're the leader, they get to choose, and they've heard me. But if they're asking you to do something that you think is unethical or illegal or something like that, then I think we need to exercise our ultimate right to say, okay, well, then I quit. And a good friend of mine was told young in his career when he was starting, he said, by one of his mentors, he said, Bruce, you need to have a spit in your eye fund. And he said, a spit in your eye fund. What does that mean? And this man said, that means that if somebody asks you to do the wrong thing, tells you they have to do the right thing, that you have enough saved that you can spit in their eye, turn around and leave. That takes courage, but you leave with your integrity. Did that get it a bit, Pascal? Okay, empathy is a component of compassion. Here's a bad survey. In 2023, Korn Ferry, which is an HR consulting firm in the United States, did a survey of HR professionals who reported that a third of them had CEOs of their own organization who were not empathetic. And the number that 22% drop, it means we're getting worse between 2022 and 2023. So this woman who's writing this article for Korn Ferry said that trying to lead without empathy, which is kind of like is very connected with compassion, leading without empathy is like trying to climb Mount Everest alone. So that made me think of something. Anybody know who these people are? Sherpas? One of them is. Well, this man here is a Sherpa guide. Anybody remember? This is Edmund Hillary. I think he's from New Zealand, right? Who was the first, were the first two people to climb Everest. And the Sherpa guide is a man named Tenzing Norgay when they got up there. So Edmund Hillary, who became Sir Edmund Hillary, became very famous because he was an Englishman. And he came from a wealthy family and was a big explorer and stuff. And everybody thinks of Edmund Hillary as the first person who climbed Mount Everest. So I thought, oh, I wonder what kind of a man Edmund Hillary was. Was he the typical member of the British colonies and empire who was arrogant about himself? So I did a little reading about Edmund Hillary. One of his biographers says, Hillary was a we man, W-E man, rather than an I man. He believed wholeheartedly in doing the right thing, whatever the costs, for the benefit of the communal whole, rather than seeking individual advancement at the expense of others. This is lovely. This he demonstrated in the fact that he devoted most of his life to helping the Sherpa people of Nepal through the Himalayan Trust, which he founded. He said, I don't know if I particularly want to be remembered for anything. I have enjoyed great satisfaction from my climb of Everest and my trips to the poles, but there's no doubt that my most worthwhile things have been the building of schools and medical clinics. They have given me more satisfaction than a footprint on any mountain. Now, maybe you've read about some of the stories of people who climb to the top of Mount Everest these days, like a famous book in the United States called Into Thin Air, which talked about people who would get the Sherpas to basically carry them to the top, and they didn't care if anybody else survived as long as they get to the top. So Edmund Hillary said, and this was about in the 1970s, he said, I think the whole attitude about climbing Mount Everest has become rather horrifying. People just want to get to the top. They don't give a damn for anybody else who may be in distress. I'm not impressed at all by people who are willing to leave someone lying under a rock to die. I think those are marvelous words. And further, who was the first person to stand on the top of Everest? It was Tenzing Norgay. In Edmund Hillary's own account, published right after that, he says, Tenzing achieved the summit and brought me up to the top on a tightrope. He told the world that this Sherpa guide got up there first and pulled him up on a short rope. Could have easily just said, because Tenzing Norgay had no way to communicate to the world, he couldn't post on Facebook that I was really the first person there. I think it says something extraordinary about Edmund Hillary's character. And I'm not impressed at all by people who are just willing to do anything to get to the top and don't give a damn about people who are left under a rock to die. I'm just reminded again about that red book that we talked about at the first. And the leaders who their first and maybe only concern is their own personal advancement, their own success, their own power, their own fame, their own wealth, which we see too often, and sadly it even contaminates healthcare. Okay, time for the afternoon movies. Apollo 13 was launched with the mission to orbit and land on the moon. Launched, I believe it was in March of 1970. Apollo 11 had landed on the moon with the first people to walk on the moon. So they were getting ready to go, and perhaps you've seen this movie. Let's just roll a little segment of this. So you can't hear the sound. The sound working? Let's see, do we need to restart here? We'll just go back and see if we can get a little sound here. Yes, we Yeah, I want to hear that first part. How many have seen Apollo 13? Many people, not everybody. Good. Go. Don't think so. Oh. Does the sound all the way up on this? It worked this morning. Oh, well, that's okay. No problem. So, okay, well, we'll just skip the movie. Let me just tell you, I mean, it was a pretty extraordinary movie in which they're ready to go to the moon. They have the 3 astronauts who are going to orbit the moon, and then 2 of them will go down in the lunar lander and land and walk on the moon. And they found out just a few days before scheduled launch that the person who's going to fly the command module and orbit the moon and wait to dock with the people who come up again from the moon's surface to the lunar lander, that he has the measles. And this is in the days before we gave measles vaccinations to children. And so the measles, if you hadn't had it, it's highly communicable, as you know. And there was the 2 other pilots. One of them had the measles, and the other had never. And so they had to make the decision, and the leaders of the astronauts said, okay, well, we can't send Ken Mattingly up there because he's not had the measles, and if he gets the measles, he'll be just getting worse sick when he's flying the command module, and you need him to help get you back to Earth. So they told Jim Lovell, who was the astronaut depicted here, Dwight, and of course this is Tom Hanks, who played Jim Lovell in the movie. They said, we need to replace this man. And first, Jim Lovell said, well, you tell me you're going to break up this team after years of practice and get somebody else. And then they said, well, this other person is trained to be the substitute. And he said, well, he's a good pilot, but he's not trained with us where they know our every move. And so the leader said, well, either you take a replacement for him, for Ken Mattingly, or none of you are going to go to the moon and we'll replace the whole crew. So the question that we ask our group, and I don't know that we'll take the time to actually have the table discussions because you only heard my bad explanation and not the movie, but what would you do if you were Jim Lovell? So the leader said, we're going to break up your team and put a new substitute in. If you don't like that, then we'll scrub the whole team of you and we'll send up 3 others. So it's left to you as Jim Lovell, the leader of the 3, to go back and tell your team. So he goes back and says to Ken Mattingly, he says, I'm sorry, but this is what they've told us, and so we're going to have to replace you because you haven't had the measles. And Ken Mattingly says, oh, I knew it. They were doing all these tests. I knew there was something wrong. Isn't that just like those doctors to scrub this mission? He says to Jim Lovell, he says, why don't you and I go up and talk to Deke Slayton? And Deke Slayton is the leader of all the astronauts. And we can explain this. And Jim Lovell says, after pondering for a minute, he says, Ken, this was my decision. He didn't say, Deke said we have to do it or we're all kicked off. He just said, this was my decision. And Ken Mattingly said, just looks at him, looks him right in the eye and says, well, that must have been a hard decision. Stands up and turns and walks out. So the question is, what would you do if you were Jim Lovell? Would you run after him? Would you say, hey, I'm sorry, this wasn't my decision, none of us would get to go if you want to go, or would you just let it ride? You don't know? It's a tough one, but what he did is he just let it ride, and it turned out, if you watch the movie, which I highly recommend, it's really an amazing movie, it turns out that Ken Mattingly didn't get the measles, he stayed back, but then remember Apollo 13 was the one that had the big explosion of a fuel tank in the command module propulsion system, so they never landed, they just circled the moon once and then came back, and then they lost their carbon dioxide scrubbers. Something went wrong with the explosion. And it was Ken Mattingly back on Earth who knew the spacecraft well enough to help the engineers come up with a way to use the materials there to redo the CO2 scrubbers. And so they might have all died if he hadn't made that decision. But it's just this courageous thing. And when we say, well, I don't agree with this thing that the management wants me to do, but that's what we've been ordered to do, then that kind of makes you a victim, and victims can't be leaders, because people will say to you, well, if you disagree with that, did you stand up to management? You know, then people say, well, why do I even have you as a leader? You know, I'll just take orders directly from management if you're not going to help us do the right thing. So it's just an example of leaders can't be victims. Okay. So I just asked you this question from me telling the story, not as well as the movie, but you'll go watch it. I just think that all of these things, integrity, humanity, he was very sympathetic to the concerns and the emotions, the scarf feelings, of loss of position and all that Ken Mattingly was demonstrating. Humility, he's recognized that this is a decision that he can't change, and self-awareness. Anyway, I thought it was fabulous. Jim Collins, no relation, but wrote this great book, Good to Great, in about 2001. And he talks about these different levels of leadership, and he describes the highest level of leadership as what he calls level 5 leadership. And after study of these great big, many large organizations in the United States and around the world, he found a couple of traits of the senior leaders that made all the difference. And the first was indomitable will. They had the courage to fulfill the mission of the organization. They were relentless in the pursuit of that mission, which in healthcare is kind of unique. Because our mission in healthcare is not to maximize shareholder return, make money. Our mission in healthcare is this powerful why. It's to help people through the hardest times in their lives, to help them live the healthiest lives possible, rather than just to make a bunch of money. That's a noble mission, and one that for me was very motivating. Even when you're tired and frustrated in your heart, you say, yeah, but this is for a noble purpose. And so the best leaders had this indomitable will and to have the courage to lead for a noble mission. But the second was combined, as Jim Collins says, it was combined paradoxically with the second trait that was most important, this deep personal humility, which means it wasn't about me, it was about others. And he goes on to say that despite the remarkable results that these leaders of successful companies had achieved, when he talked to people in the organization, almost nobody in the organization said, oh, it's all because of our boss. She is so great. They just said, we have this culture here that I feel a part of the organization. I can do my best work. Sound a little bit familiar here to you all? I hope so. The good to great leaders never wanted to become larger than life heroes. They never aspired to be put on a pedestal or become unreachable icons. They were ordinary people quietly producing extraordinary results. Now, Pfeffer may tell you in his book that humility displays weakness. He is wrong. If you want to just achieve power, you can do that. And many people will achieve power that. But if you want to change things for the better, here's the example. Some final thoughts to consider. Public trust, I just want to congratulate you all. You live in an extraordinary place, not only beautiful, but look at you. Look at you. Trust in government. It's really interesting. They found in this study, and this study was published just in 2023, lower trust came, these are the people who you really need to work with to help them feel part of it. But higher trust comes when people feel they have a say in decisions and actions, which is what we're talking about here, leadership by listening to others. And even when you have to make a decision that goes contrary to what some of the folks want, if they feel like they've been heard and you've had a chance to talk with them and say, well, I understand that, I understand why you'd like to do that, but here's why, here's the goal we need to get to, this is why we get there. Then people, in my experience, they say, well, I talked to them and they explained to me, and I understand why they made it. At least I feel like I was heard. And then look at you in healthcare. Oh my. You accept applicants. Anyway, thank you. That's amazing. But still 73%. You have room for improvement. I don't know. Is Belgium really a little better? I don't know. Doubt it. But I think a lot of it comes from the fact that you're already practicing these values. But we can be better because there's some of those people in the 27% who are going through the hardest times in their life. When practicing your values here will help them be more engaged and feel like they've been heard. Now, as you're finishing up today and as you go through this week, here's a great thing. John Dewey was an American educator in the late 19th and early 20th century who said, we don't really learn from experience. We always say that. I say that. Oh, man, experience is the best teacher. Well, he said it's not true, but we will learn from reflecting on experiences. So don't leave at the end of this week. You're all taking notes. That's great. But take time to reflect on what you've learned and to set yourself some goals on how you want to be a little bit different. Tom DeLong, who's an extraordinary teacher, he teaches in our program, he's a professor at the Harvard Business School. He says that most leaders ask themselves, how am I experiencing myself now that I'm a leader? Pretty good. I think I'm pretty knowledgeable now. People seem to like me. I think we're getting things done. I'm getting better known around the organization or in the community, whatever. How am I experiencing myself as a leader? Pretty good. But he says good leaders ask this a question. How are others experiencing me when I'm their leader or when I'm their colleague at work? How are others experiencing me? But he says the best leaders ask this question of themselves. How are others experiencing themselves when I'm their leader? This goes to this whole question about how are people evolving to be more capable and more fulfilled in using their abilities in better ways when we have the opportunity to be their colleague or their leader. Now, let's talk for 1 minute as we conclude about the personal brand. So we all, the Harvard Business Review is kind of the Bible for some business leaders in the country, certainly people in academia, and business schools and all, top place. So here's the cover issue I think it was in May, June of 2023. Yeah. Build your own personal brand. How to communicate your value to the world. A brand is just like selling Coke Light. By the way, I like this. It's how your brand is how to make people want to have you as their leader, or have you as, drive your kind of make of car, whatever. In other words, how do you want others to experience you is a question. But how do you want others to experience themselves, as Professor DeLong, is really the question we should be asking. So one of the exercises we do in our program is a personal branding exercise, which is totally different than what you think about with a branding exercise. It's totally different than what those authors in Harvard Business Review talked about, how to let the world know how great you are. It's more about how are other people experiencing you as a leader. It was developed by our friend Bruce Jensen, who was our Vice President of Communication for many years at Intermountain and now teaches in our program. And he developed this personal branding exercise where we go through this exercise as defining in a few words, like 5 words, what's our purpose. Bruce, who's got a great brand, his personal brand or purpose, he loves photography now that he's mostly retired, but his brand is be a light. Show the light and be a light, which can be thought of both in photography, but a light to others of a path forward. What are your distinctive personality traits in a few words? What are your essential values? And then, instead of on promised benefits, these are not benefits to yourself, but how will others benefit functionally and emotionally if you're their friend, if you're their colleague, if you're their leader. And these need to be aspirational. It needs to be something we look at and say, that's the kind of a leader I want to be. So just really quickly, here's an example of this woman, Marcia Rodriguez. Her purpose, she's a teacher, a secondary school teacher, engaging hearts and minds in the liberating power of learning. Her personality is bright, caring, passionate, and optimistic. And then here's her values. And then the promised benefits, functionally, these kids get admitted to better colleges. They get scholarships. They have internships in science and technology, engineering, math, new and enhanced. And emotional, they have increased self-confidence. They have good self-esteem. They feel empowered, and they feel like they're achieving something. So we'll leave you a copy of these slides if you want to do this exercise sometime. It's a difficult process, and you might need a little coaching along the way with somebody here, but I think it's really worthwhile to do. So as we conclude, I just ask you to think about how often do you see leaders demonstrate? How often do you demonstrate recognition and management of their own emotional state and the emotional needs of others? How often do you see leaders demonstrate love? Love meaning I care about you enough to do something that is a sacrifice for me of my time, of my work, my effort, or even of my money that shows that I care about you. How often do you see them demonstrate inspiration, giving others autonomy and creativity, integrity, accountability, forgiveness, compassion, all of Fred Keel's things, an unwavering resolve to accomplish a noble purpose, humility. We see that exactly never in American politics. Some people talk about these as being the soft skills of leadership, but we think they're much more the essential skills of leadership. But I'm sorry, but these are just not taught in business schools in the United States. There is some hope, though. This I just read on Saturday. Becker's Hospital Review is a publication that we receive, notices every day. It says, there's this rise of humble hospital executive suites. In an era of unprecedented turnover and mounting financial pressure, most successful healthcare executives are discovering that leadership no longer begins in the boardroom. And then Eric Wexler, who's a friend of mine, said healthcare in the United States is a pivotal moment. We're navigating what I call a polycrisis economic policy and all, but here's the best part of it. According to today's most revered C-suite executives, most successful leaders in the next half decade won't be those with the biggest egos or the most accomplishments, but individuals with selflessness, humility, and fortitude. I hope that's true. I don't know that there's very many revered C-suite executives. I don't know, revered, that's too high a praise for me to comprehend, but I think that we're starting, you are starting, we are trying to start this movement toward a different kind of leadership in healthcare. So back to your question, I love this definition from Peter Drucker, who is probably the most famous business consultant in American history. And here's another one. David Brooks is an American columnist and author. These are people who get it. And our purpose and mission at the Leadership Institute, and I know yours here at HEG, is to promote and implement these principles of leadership. Let me just tell you as an outside observer, a friend, so I may be a little biased, but you are on the right path. Now it's all up to us who understand these principles, and there's ample, and I hope you've understood, we've shared some of that today, you'll hear more in the next couple of days. There's ample evidence that this works. This is what's needed in leadership today, and it's desperately needed even in healthcare leadership, because we're doing some of the things that are the very hardest that make such a profound personal difference to individuals. So we look to you as examples, as friends and colleagues. We look to continue to learn from and with you in the future, and I offer my very sincere thanks for this gracious invitation to be here with you. And I'm happy to stay here and if you have some questions and let the rest of you get on with it. I don't want to delay you going off to lunch. It's been a long morning, but thank you for your attention and your participation.
Thank you. Charles, maybe we can take 1 or 2 minutes for feedback, questions. Do you think it makes sense to play the movie? This is Switzerland. We are always 10 years behind. And we got the sound, or maybe we move on and at some point people can watch the movie. What do you think?
Yeah, your call. I guess if we're going to take a couple of minutes, you can easily find a movie.
Yeah, thank you.
En français. But if you have a question or two, we could take that. I just didn't want to delay you from going on. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for your great talk. It was a very inspiring presentation. We will look at a lot on how we as leaders should take care of others, but how should we take care of the leaders? How do we reward leaders for the good work?
That's a great question. You know, first I think we need to help leaders take care of themselves too. I mean, so much that I was trained in medical school and residency surgical training was, you know, if you need to sleep more than 5 hours a day, you're lazy, you know, and it's just this punishing thing that is not sustainable. In our program, for years we had this wonderful woman who's a PhD in neuroscience talk about the importance of sleep and appropriate exercise and the right balance of stress. You got to have a little bit of stress or you don't really get engaged. But I think taking care of yourself is part of it. And I think for us as leaders, we need to exemplify that we're taking care of ourselves, and we need to insist that those we lead take care of themselves too, especially the good people. So, I mean, how do we reward and encourage people who are demonstrating the right things? You know, certainly we do that through our ability to reward people with raises and promotions. But one of the most powerful, I believe, and in my own experience, is taking the time to sincerely and authentically thank them for the unique things that they're doing. It was one of the things, Idris and I talked about this last night, you know, that I miss most about being a physician is, you know, you'd spend time with people and get to know them. And some people, you know, I did mostly cancer surgery for people with kidney cancers, prostate cancer and stuff. Most of the time it turned out well, but sometimes you just couldn't solve the problem, but you're there with them. And some of the most meaningful paydays I ever had in my life were days when some patient that I couldn't cure, but I was with them to make their journey a little easier along the way, gave me a hug near the end and said, "Thank you for caring about me." Those days meant more to me than any bonus in money I've ever received. And I think we don't recognize enough the value, and sometimes it needs to be public thanks, you know, in the group or more broadly, but I think just giving people, trusting them with more responsibility, giving away some of your power to them, trusting them, that's one of the ways we express thanks too. Does that help a bit? You know, I used to say this all the time, you know, it's the difference between practicing medicine. I got quite a few guy hugs, you know, from people. Nobody ever came up to me as an administrator and said, "Can I give you a hug? You made the best decision." That doesn't happen too much. Another question? Yes.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I very much enjoyed listening to you, and I think this is probably true for everyone from us. I had one question which might be a little bit provocative.
Good.
Right? I think we all agree that integrity is an essential aspect of good leadership. Mm-hmm. Now, when looking on the highest level of leadership internationally, it seems a little bit as if integrity might get a little bit out of fashion. Maybe you could comment on that.
Right. Well, thank you. I would like to comment on that. Because remember that those principles that we talked about at the very first, Jeffrey Pfeffer's principles, they were not defined as these are the best ways to get people to come together to create a better future. Those 7 principles were defined as ways that you can accrue personal power, personal fame, and personal wealth. Okay? And sadly, they kind of work, as evidenced by who is the President of the United States today. If you're watching over there, yes, I said it. So I don't deny that that gets people power, but oh, somebody, it's the Secret Service listening to me, CIA. Okay, I'll go to prison next. You know, it gets people power probably, not always, but too often. But we're not talking about getting personal power. We're talking about changing an organization for the better, for the people we serve and the people, the incredibly dedicated people at the front line of healthcare who give so much in their work. Great question. Thank you. Any others?
If I might, just following up on that. So if we create a culture that is based on this, do you think that we'll be able to resist to possible Pfeffer disciples among us?
Good question, and we were talking about that just a little bit during the break. You know, my experience is when I get to know individuals, almost always people are good at heart. Sometimes there are people who are just so self-focused they can't think of anything but that. But my experience is when we talk about principles like this with our team or with the organization or with people outside, and they get to know us that we're not just saying things, but we're really trying our best to live by it. Despite our failings, we can't all be perfect in exemplifying these leadership things, but that's our aspiration. People resonate with that. I know in my own life, my life has been tremendously influenced by probably 15 or 20 senior physician leaders, senior nursing leaders when I was in medical school, when I was in residency, when I was early in practice and through my career, and then some administrative leaders who I say, I want to be like her. You know, I want to demonstrate that competency and that concern, that authentic concern and compassion for others that she does. I think that attracts the right kind of people. And if we build a culture that attracts that kind of people, and then others who are only concerned about themselves, let them go find another place to work. Because they don't feel comfortable in a culture like that because it's all about them. Does that make sense? I guess I just believe in the innate goodness of most people. Sometimes they got to discover it. Okay, well, thank you again.
So, Charles, you have now to pick up, and I'm doing that only once because Emily Gregory is seeing the trick. Right or left? And I know, Emily, but I can change this afternoon. Right or left?
Oh, I'm supposed to pick right or left?
Yeah, and it's not politically driven.
I'm kind of a centrist.
Some people might suggest you.
I select number 2.
Okay. It's heavy, Charles.
Oh, it's heavy? Okay, well, whatever you think. I trust you, my friend.
So maybe we start with that.
No lie.
Because you seem disappointed. You say it's small.
No.
And what is it?
It's lovely.
What is it? You don't have to open it because we have one extra.
Oui. Ah.
This is the Swiss Leadership.
Oh,
tool.
Lovely. Yes, that's right.
And actually, it's small, yet it has USB key.
Oh, really?
And it has your first name, so it's yours inside the
merci
box.
beaucoup.
This is mine.
Ah, oui.
And if you had picked that, you would have the famous chocolate we walked across this morning.
Yes.
And I said, this is the amazing chocolate, very exclusive. Nobody can have it this morning. And you say, I wish I had some. This is the box. You can go back to the US with some of the chocolate. You don't have to eat them. And remember our discussion?
Love leadership.
So it's Love Leadership 2025.
Oh, merci.
Thank you so much. And I want to say to our colleagues that Charles is with us for the 3 days. So enjoy Charles. He'll be sitting with us here. So really take advantage of his presence, continue the conversation, even though they might be crucial or not. Please help me introduce Dr. Emily Gregory, who is with us already, and we are looking forward to starting at 2. Between now and 2, what I learned from the Leadership Institute is for the program to be a success and to have the best leaders have to have food.
Yes.
Good food, a lot of food. And actually, for the first time in the HUG, everything I told you is the first time, I might exaggerate, but Gustave is booked just for you, not 1 day, not 2 days, but 3 days. This is also happening thanks to our sponsors. So now you will have to slowly move and go to Gustave Brasserie, enjoy your meal, and the keynote speakers will be also with us. Gustave, there is no seats attributed. This is leaders. It's not defined by the seat you have. Is that correct?
Oui.
And we have to start at 2 p.m. So
and the best part of the teaching is definitely this afternoon. So come back ready to learn and have a great afternoon. Thank you, mon ami.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.